Somewhere in a quiet care home, a woman with silver hair sits in a rocking chair, staring blankly out a frost-lined window. Her hands tremble softly as she holds a photograph, a frozen image of a life once lived. In the photograph, there are children, laughter, sunlight, a husband, a dog, a moment captured long ago. But her eyes do not light with recognition. Her mind cannot summon their names. Her memories, once vibrant and overflowing, have faded into mist. Alzheimer's disease has taken from her the very essence of self. When her daughter visits and takes her hand, she smiles, polite and uncertain. "You look familiar," she says, and the words cut deeper than any wound. This woman was once a teacher, a lover of books, a master of small kindnesses. But without memory, those truths have no anchor. They exist nowhere but in the minds of others. She herself has forgotten who she island. On the other side of the world, a man sits in his study, surrounded by shelves overflowing with notebooks, one for each year of his life. He remembers everything, not just birthdays and anniversaries, but the mundane and the meaningless. What he wore on April 17th, 1992. What the weather was like on a random Tuesday in 1986. The scent of a bakery he passed only once. This man lives with hyperthymesia, an extraordinary and rare ability to recall nearly every day of his life in vivid, exhausting detail, while others forget their childhoods or blur the edges of their past. His memories are sharp, persistent, inescapable. Each moment replays itself as if no time has passed. He is trapped in memory's embrace, and there is no forgetting. These two lives represent opposite poles of the same force memory. One mind has lost the ability to hold on, the other cannot let go. Between them lies the spectrum of human experience, defined, shaped, and haunted by what we remember. Memory is not merely a faculty of the brain. It is the architecture of identity, the compass by which we navigate life. It is the silent narrator that tells us who we were, what we have learned, and who we are becoming. Strip it away, and a person may still breathe, still eat, still speak, but they will no longer know themselves. Memory is everywhere, and yet nowhere. It is the soft echo of your mother's voice, the trembling of your hands on the steering wheel during your first driving lesson, the ache in your chest when you remember someone you've lost. It is invisible, weightless, intangible, and yet it can bring you to tears, guide your decisions, and shape your destiny. It is paradoxical, for though it resides within the brain, it defines the heart of who we are. The paradox deepens when we realize that memory is not a perfect recording. It is not a tape we can rewind with precision or a photograph untouched by time. Memory is malleable, reconstructed each time we access it. It is altered by emotion, suggestion, repetition, and even the act of remembering itself. The ancients revered memory as sacred. In Norse myth, the god Mimir, whose name means the rememberer, guarded the well of wisdom beneath the roots of the world tree. Odin sacrificed an eye to drink from it to gain memory, knowledge, insight. The Greeks personified memory in Mnemosyne, mother of the 9 muses. To them, memory gave birth to all art and learning. Even today, we speak of memory with reverence and awe, whether we realize it or not. We call to it when we seek truth. We trust it to testify in courts. We lean on it to anchor us in reality, and yet it fails us. It fades, it betrays, it vanishes when we need it most. Who has not walked into a room and forgotten why? Who has not searched in vain for a name on the tip of the tongue? Who has not watched a loved one disappear behind the veil of dementia, as if sinking beneath dark waters, their identity dissolving even as their body remains? What cruelty that the very thing we depend on most is so fragile. What wonder that we still trust it at all. But memory is not merely biology gone awry. It is a vast, intricate system built on electric pulses and chemical messengers. It involves multiple regions of the brain: the hippocampus for forming new memories, the amygdala for emotion-laced recall, the prefrontal cortex for working memory and decision-making. It requires sleep, attention, repetition, and meaning. It thrives when we connect the dots, when we tell stories. Because memory is not just data, it is narrative. It is the way we thread events together into something coherent. It is how we make sense of chaos. Consider a trauma survivor. The memory may not come in words, but in sensations. The smell of smoke, the screech of tires, the pounding of blood in the ears. The memory is stored in fragments, scattered across the sensory regions of the brain. Later, those fragments may be triggered by the smallest thing: a sound, a scent, a phrase, and suddenly the past floods into the present. This is the double-edged sword of memory. It can save us, or it can destroy us. Or think of a child sitting at their grandmother's knee, listening to stories about the old country. Those stories are not just entertainment. They are inheritance. They are the transmission of memory across generations. The child will grow up remembering the way her grandmother's voice trembled, the way she sipped tea between sentences. Years later, when the grandmother is gone, the memory will still be there, altered perhaps, softened by time, but alive. And it will shape how the child sees the world. Memory is not a single thing. It is a process, a dance between neurons, a chemical pattern, a physiological event that gives rise to psychological meaning. It is not fixed in stone, but rewritten every time it is called forth. Some memories are conscious, deliberate, like recalling a fact or a phone number. Others are buried deep, shaping our behaviors and reactions without our awareness. We call these implicit memories, and they are no less powerful for being hidden. This series will explore the memory system in its full breadth. We will journey through the science, how memory is encoded, stored, and retrieved. We will look at short-term and long-term memory, how attention and emotion affect what we remember, how memories are stabilized during sleep, and how trauma can freeze or distort memory entirely. We will examine the phenomenon of forgetting not as a flaw, but as an essential function of the system. We will also peer into the eerie world of false memories and the ways in which memory shapes not just what we know, but who we are. In doing so, we will meet characters drawn from real life: the amnesiac who lives moment to moment, the survivor haunted by a single image, the scholar who remembers entire books, the patient who forgets her own name. Through them, we will see how memory is both intensely personal and universally human. It is the thread that binds each of us to our past and to one another. Before we begin, remember this: every moment of your life, every joy, every wound, every word spoken to you in love or cruelty lives in memory. Some of it accessible, some of it buried, all of it part of the great, trembling mosaic that makes you, you too. What is memory? Really, memory is often taken for granted. We rely on it every day, in ways so seamless and habitual that we rarely stop to question what it is or how it works. You remember how to tie your shoes. You recall a friend's voice. You recognize your childhood home in an old photograph. But what is actually happening when you remember? What is this invisible force that allows you to summon fragments of the past and hold them up to the light of the present? Memory is not a thing, like a book or a hard drive. It is a dynamic, living process, a system of systems operating in harmony most of the time. And when it fails, we realize just how much we rely on its quiet power. At its core, memory is the capacity to acquire, store, and retrieve information. That sounds clinical, almost mechanical, but for humans, Memory is much more than that. It is the foundation of learning, identity, emotion, and perception. It is how we know ourselves, how we navigate time, how we assign meaning to experience. Without memory, there is no continuity. Every moment would be a fresh beginning. There would be no past to learn from, no future to plan for. We would exist in an eternal present, reacting, but never reflecting. Life would be immediate, instinctive, and disjointed. To understand memory, one must first abandon the metaphor of the brain as a storage unit or a tape recorder. The brain does not store memories the way a file cabinet holds documents. There are no drawers labeled wedding day or first heartbreak. Instead, memory is a pattern of activity spread across multiple regions of the brain. It is encoded in neural circuits, stored in the strength of synapses, and recalled by reactivating those same circuits in a similar pattern. It is more like a symphony than a spreadsheet, an orchestration of signals, rhythms, and feedback loops that create the illusion of permanence. Imagine a single moment in your life. Perhaps the first time you rode a bicycle. You can still see the sunlight flickering through the trees. Feel the wobble of the handlebars. Hear your father's voice shouting encouragement from behind. You can remember the fear, the thrill, the moment your feet found balance. But that memory is not stored in one place. The visual elements are stored in the occipital lobes, the sounds in the auditory cortex, the physical sensations in the somatosensory system. The emotion is tagged by the amygdala. The narrative, what happened and in what order, is bound together by the hippocampus. When you recall that day, your brain reactivates all these regions simultaneously, weaving them together into a single, coherent memory. It feels like reliving, but it is, in fact, a reconstruction. Memory begins with attention. You cannot remember what you do not notice. The brain is constantly bombarded with sensory data, most of which is filtered out as irrelevant. Attention acts as a spotlight, directing resources to specific stimuli. What you notice is then encoded, transformed into a neural representation that the brain can work with. Encoding can happen in several ways: visually, acoustically, semantically. You might remember a word because of how it sounded, or because it reminded you of something meaningful. The depth of encoding matters. The more deeply you process information, the more likely it is to stick. Once encoded, the memory enters short-term or working memory, a kind of mental scratch pad. Here, the brain holds information briefly, often for no more than 15 to 30 seconds. This is where you remember a phone number long enough to dial it or hold a sentence in your head while listening to the next one. Working memory is limited in capacity, typically able to hold about 7 items at once. It is also vulnerable to distraction. A sudden interruption can cause the memory to vanish. To move beyond this fleeting stage, information must be rehearsed, repeated, or linked to something already known. Then, it may enter long-term memory. Long-term memory is where the enduring traces of experience reside. Unlike working memory, it is vast and durable, capable of holding a lifetime of information, but it is not a simple storage space. Memories here are not static. They change over time. They decay, consolidate, or become distorted. Some become stronger through use. Others fade from neglect. Long-term memory is divided into types: declarative and non-declarative. Declarative memory includes facts and events, things you can consciously recall and describe. Non-declarative memory includes skills and habits, things you do without thinking, like riding a bike or typing on a keyboard. But even this division is more complex than it seems. Declarative memory splits further into episodic and semantic memory. Episodic memory is autobiographical. It is the memory of your own experiences, tied to a time and place. Semantic memory, by contrast, is general knowledge, things you know but do not remember learning, like the capital of France or the definition of a word. Non-declarative memory includes procedural memory, how to do things, priming, how exposure to one stimulus affects response to another, and classical conditioning, associating one thing with another, like Pavlov's dogs salivating at a bell. Each of these types of memory engages different neural systems. The hippocampus is essential for forming new episodic memories. Damage to it can prevent the creation of new memories while leaving older ones intact, a condition known as anterograde amnesia. Semantic memory also relies on the hippocampus early on, but over time, knowledge becomes independent of it and is stored in the neocortex. Procedural memory, on the other hand, depends on the basal ganglia and the cerebellum structures involved in motor control and learning. Memory is also shaped by emotion. The brain remembers emotionally charged events more vividly than neutral ones. This is because the amygdala, the brain's emotional center, interacts closely with the hippocampus during encoding. When something terrifying, joyful, or tragic happens, the amygdala signals that this memory is important and should be prioritized. This is why you may remember exactly where you were during a global tragedy, or the face of someone you loved and lost, while forgetting the mundane details of last Tuesday. Yet emotion does not guarantee accuracy. In fact, it can distort memory. Trauma survivors may experience flashbacks, vivid, involuntary recollections that feel as real as the original event. But these memories are often fragmented and altered by fear. Conversely, some traumatic memories are repressed or dissociated. The debate over how trauma affects memory is ongoing, with some researchers emphasizing the unreliability of such memories and others highlighting their persistence. There is also a social dimension to memory. We do not remember in isolation. Stories, conversations, and shared experiences shape what we recall and how we interpret it. Collective memory, what a society chooses to remember or forget, can influence identity on a cultural level. Historical events, myths, and national narratives are passed down not just through books, but through lived memory, through families, rituals, and traditions. Ultimately, memory is not just something we have, it is something we do. It is active, not passive. It is an ongoing negotiation between the past and the present, between what happened and how we feel about it, between what we want to remember and what we try to forget. It is subjective, fluid, and profoundly human. What, then, is memory, really? It is the breath of experience turned into thought. It is the fingerprint of time upon the mind. It is not a perfect mirror of reality, but a lens one that bends, magnifies, and sometimes shatters the image of what was. And yet, without it, we would be lost. 3. The three-stage model. If memory were a journey, it would not be a straight path, but a winding, multi-layered process, beginning with a flicker of awareness and ending sometimes years later with the quiet resurfacing of a forgotten face, a scent, or a feeling. For decades, scientists have attempted to map this journey, to understand how the brain turns passing experience into stored knowledge, and how it later reaches back to retrieve what has been saved. One of the foundational frameworks in this exploration is known as the three-stage model of memory: encoding, storage, and retrieval. It is a deceptively simple model for a complex process, but within its structure lies the skeleton of all human remembering. Encoding is the first step. It is where memory begins, not with storage, but with transformation. The brain must take in sensory input from the world and convert it into a format that can be used. This is not a passive recording. Encoding is an active, interpretive act. The mind decides what to attend to, what to filter out, what to keep, and what to discard. In a crowded room full of voices, the brain can latch onto the sound of your name and bring it into focus, even if you weren't listening for it. This is selective attention, and it is crucial to memory. Without attention, there is no encoding. Without encoding, there is no memory. The quality of encoding determines the strength of the memory. Shallow encoding based on superficial features like the sound or appearance of a word leaves only a faint imprint. Deep encoding based on meaning, emotion, or personal relevance engraves the memory more firmly. Think of a name you learned at a party. If you merely heard it once, you may forget it by morning. But if the person reminded you of someone important, or if their name was unusual, or if you repeated it out loud several times, the chances of remembering increase. This is because your brain engaged more deeply with the information. It created associations, patterns, and significance. The second stage is storage. This is where encoded information must be maintained over time, held within the vast and complex architecture of the brain. But unlike a hard drive, the brain does not store memories in neat, isolated files. Storage is not a static act. It is dynamic, constantly evolving. Memories shift, decay, strengthen, and consolidate. In the early moments after learning, a memory is fragile. It is held in a temporary state, vulnerable to interference. During this period, even a simple distraction can cause the memory trace to disintegrate. To stabilize a memory, the brain must undergo a process called consolidation. This involves strengthening the connections between neurons, transforming a short-term memory into a more durable long-term one. Sleep plays a vital role in this process. During deep stages of sleep, particularly during slow wave and REM phases, the brain replays recent experiences. Neurons fire in similar patterns as they did during the original experience, reinforcing synaptic pathways. It is as though the brain is rehearsing what matters, deciding what to keep and what to let go. This is why a good night's sleep can enhance learning, and why sleep deprivation impairs memory. Storage does not mean permanence. Even long-term memories can degrade over time. The brain is not built to retain everything. It is built to retain what is useful. Information that is rarely accessed, that has little emotional charge or relevance, may fade. This is not a failure, but an adaptive feature. Forgetting helps the brain avoid overload, and it prioritizes memories that aid in decision-making, survival, and social connection. The forgetting curve, first described by Hermann Ebbinghaus in the 19th century, shows how quickly we lose information if it is not reinforced. Within days, most of what we learn is gone, unless we review or apply it. But some memories last. They persist across decades, resurfacing with little effort. These are often the ones encoded with high emotion, repeated frequently, or tied to personal identity. The storage of these memories is distributed across the brain. Visual elements in the occipital lobes, language in the temporal lobes, emotion in the limbic system. The hippocampus acts as a kind of index, helping to bind these elements together into a retrievable whole. As time passes, the memory becomes less dependent on the hippocampus and more rooted in the neocortex. This transition, sometimes called systems consolidation, allows for long-term retention, independent of the initial learning structures. The third stage is retrieval, the act of bringing a stored memory back into consciousness. This is what we typically think of when we talk about remembering. Retrieval can be deliberate, as when you try to recall a name or a date, or it can be spontaneous, as when a scent triggers a childhood memory without warning. But retrieval is not just a matter of pressing play. It is a reconstruction, not a replay. The brain fills in gaps, edits for coherence, and reshapes memory based on present circumstances. This is why two people can remember the same event differently. Each person reconstructs the event using a unique blend of stored detail and current context. Retrieval relies heavily on cues stimuli that trigger the memory. A familiar face, a song, a place, a feeling. These cues can act like keys unlocking doors in the mind. But if the cues are weak or absent, retrieval can fail. This is what happens during a tip of the tongue experience. You know the word, the name, the fact, but it eludes you. The memory is there, but the path to it is obscured. Sometimes, retrieval cues from the original encoding context can help. This is called context-dependent memory. You may find it easier to recall a piece of information in the place where you first learned it, or in the same emotional state. Interestingly, every act of retrieval changes the memory. This is called reconsolidation. When a memory is recalled, it becomes temporarily unstable, open to modification before it is stored again. This process can strengthen the memory through repetition, or it can alter it through new information or emotional reappraisal. This is why eyewitness testimony is so unreliable. Repeated questioning, leading language, or exposure to others' accounts can subtly reshape what a person believes they saw. Over time, the new version of the memory may feel more real than the original. The three-stage model, encoding, storage, retrieval, offers a framework for understanding how memory works, but it is not a complete map. It is a starting point, a skeleton on which the complexity of cognition is hung. Each stage is influenced by countless factors: attention, emotion, sleep, repetition, trauma, age, disease, and more. And each stage can fail in its own way. Poor encoding means the memory never forms. Faulty storage means it degrades. Weak retrieval means it cannot be accessed, even if it still exists. Yet within this fragile machinery lies the entirety of human experience. Every lesson you've learned, every face you've loved, every mistake you've made, they all reside in this system, waiting to be recalled or rewritten. Memory is not just what we have, it is what we are. And understanding how it works is the first step toward understanding ourselves. 4. Sensory memory. The lightning snapshot. Long before we consciously register a moment, our brain has already begun capturing it. This preconscious form of memory, known as sensory memory, is the earliest phase of memory processing and the most fleeting. It exists on the razor-thin edge between perception and awareness, lasting for mere fractions of a second before vanishing unless we choose to focus on it. It is the echo after a sound, the after-image when you close your eyes, the brief imprint of a passing face. Though we rarely notice it, sensory memory forms the gateway to all other forms of memory. It is the mind's raw data collector, the system that continuously sweeps the environment, storing split-second impressions of everything we see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. To grasp the nature of sensory memory, imagine walking through a bustling marketplace. The scent of spices wafts through the air. A child's laugh rings out behind you. Sunlight glints off a brass pot. Your eyes dart from color to movement. Your ears fill with overlapping voices and footsteps. In this moment, your senses are overwhelmed, yet your brain is absorbing more information than you can possibly process. For a brief moment, each piece of input is held in a fragile, high-resolution state. This is sensory memory, an ultra-short-term buffer that holds a perfect, though rapidly decaying, replica of the sensory world. Each sense has its own dedicated sensory memory system. The most studied are iconic memory for visual input and echoic memory for auditory input. Iconic memory lasts for roughly 250 milliseconds. It holds the entire visual scene in near photographic detail for a blink of time. This allows the brain to process motion, stabilize perception during eye movements, and integrate new visual input with what came just before. Echoic memory, by contrast, lasts longer, up to 3 or 4 seconds. It preserves the last few seconds of sound in a kind of acoustic loop, allowing us to comprehend speech and notice changes in tone or pitch even after the sound has faded. This difference in duration reflects the different ways our senses work. Vision is fast, immediate, and constantly shifting. We need to process visual scenes quickly to navigate the world. Auditory information, however, unfolds over time. We don't hear an entire word or sentence all at once. We receive it sequentially. Echoic memory allows us to rewind slightly, to catch what we may not have fully processed in the moment. It's why you can often repeat the last thing someone said, even if you weren't paying attention when they said it. The brain, in effect, kept a temporary recording running, just in case. Other sensory memories exist as well. Haptic memory stores tactile sensations, the feel of a surface, the vibration of a phone, the brush of fabric against skin. Gustatory and olfactory memories briefly preserve taste and smell, though these are less well understood. Smell, in particular, has a powerful link to emotion and long-term memory due to the direct connection between the olfactory bulb and the brain's limbic system. A scent might not remain in sensory memory long, but it can trigger vivid autobiographical memories that stretch back decades. Sensory memory is not under conscious control. It operates beneath awareness, continuously refreshing with new input, flushing out what is no longer needed. It is unfiltered, which means it includes everything in the field of sensation, not just what you're focused on. That is both its power and its limitation. The sheer volume of information held in sensory memory would overwhelm the brain if not for the process of attention. Attention is the mechanism by which certain elements of sensory memory are selected for further processing. It is the hand that plucks a single strand from the sea of sensation and says, "This matters." Consider a common psychological experiment known as the partial report paradigm, first conducted by George Sperling in the 1960s. Participants were shown a grid of letters for a very brief moment, too short to read them all. But when given a tone indicating which row to recall immediately after the image disappeared, they could accurately report the letters from that row, even though they had not consciously focused on it. This demonstrated that the entire grid had been held momentarily in iconic memory, but only part of it could be transferred to short-term memory through attention. This momentary holding place is critical for our experience of continuity. Without sensory memory, the world would appear disjointed, like a film missing every other frame. Movements would stutter, sounds would be broken, and the sense of flow would be lost. Sensory memory provides the glue between the now and the next now. It allows us to perceive motion as smooth, language as coherent, and sensations as unified. It is the silent partner of perception, always working, always fading. Yet sensory memory is not flawless. It is highly susceptible to interference. A sudden flash can overwrite a visual trace. A loud noise can erase the echo of a previous sound. The brain's limited capacity means that sensory memory must be continuously refreshed or replaced. It is not designed for storage, but for transition. Its purpose is not to preserve, but to prioritize. In this way, sensory memory serves as the triage point of the mind. It holds everything for a breath of time, just long enough for the brain to decide what should be ignored, what should be processed, and what should be remembered. Most of what enters sensory memory never reaches consciousness. It is discarded, filtered out, deemed irrelevant, but occasionally, something catches the brain's attention. A strange noise, a flash of danger, the face of someone familiar, and in that moment, the sensory trace is promoted. It enters the realm of short-term memory, where it becomes available for deliberate thought and possibly for long-term storage. Sensory memory also plays a key role in reflexive and survival responses. The sudden blare of a horn, the bright flash of lightning, the touch of something hot, these are sensed and processed before conscious awareness even kicks in. The body reacts while the mind is still catching up. Sensory memory enables this immediacy. It allows for reaction without delay, for the brain to prepare a response before the full details are even known. Despite its transience, sensory memory is a vital part of the larger memory system. It is the opening note of the symphony, the strike of the match before the fire. Without it, no other memory could exist. There would be nothing to encode, nothing to store, nothing to retrieve. The richness of experience begins here, in the brief flash of sensation that captures a world and then lets it go. In the coming sections, we will explore what happens after sensory memory has done its job. We will follow the journey of selected impressions as they move into short-term and working memory, where they are held, manipulated, and prepared for long-term storage. But it all begins with this invisible moment, this lightning snapshot of the senses where the mind opens its eyes, ears, skin, and breath to the world and says, I notice. 5. Short-term memory. The brain's notepad. Imagine standing in front of an ATM, waiting to withdraw money. You glance at your phone to check your bank account number. It's a string of digits, unfamiliar and meaningless except for this moment. You read it, close your phone, and begin to type it into the machine. For those brief seconds, the number is active in your mind, suspended in a fragile state of awareness. Once you've completed the transaction, the number disappears. You don't need it anymore, and your brain lets it go. This is short-term memory at work, a temporary storage system that allows you to hold information in mind just long enough to use it, then discard it. Short-term memory is the mental notepad of the brain. It doesn't store knowledge for years or even days. It is fleeting, holding information for mere seconds, occasionally up to a minute, and only when actively maintained. Unlike long-term memory, which is vast and relatively permanent, short-term memory is narrow and fragile. It can hold only a small number of items at once, often cited as 7, plus or minus 2. This limitation, discovered by psychologist George Miller in the 1950s, has come to define our understanding of cognitive load. When too much information enters at once, short-term memory becomes overwhelmed, and pieces begin to drop away. But despite its limitations, short-term memory is indispensable. It allows us to make sense of language as we hear it, to carry out mental arithmetic, to follow a conversation, to hold directions in our head as we walk from one room to another. Without it, each moment would be disconnected from the next. We would hear isolated words rather than sentences, see snapshots rather than sequences, act without continuity. Short-term memory is what allows the mind to stretch across the present. This system is not a passive container. It is dynamic, interactive, and closely linked to attention. When we focus on a piece of information like a phone number, a name, or a sentence, we activate a loop in the brain that temporarily maintains it. If we rehearse it mentally, repeating it over and over, we can keep it active. But if we are interrupted or distracted, the memory decays rapidly. This decay is not a flaw, but a function. The brain prioritizes resources. It holds information just long enough to determine whether it's worth encoding into long-term memory or letting it fade. One way the brain manages short-term memory load is through a strategy called chunking. Instead of remembering a string of 10 individual digits, we break them into meaningful groups, like a phone number: 555, 867, 5,309. The same number, but easier to hold. This technique shows how short-term memory interacts with existing knowledge. The more patterns and associations we have stored in long-term memory, the more efficiently we can chunk new information. A chess master, for example, can look at a board and remember the position of dozens of pieces, not because their short-term memory is larger, but because they see patterns and strategies rather than individual pawns and knights. Another key feature of short-term memory is its fragility. Unless we actively work to retain it, information fades quickly. This has been demonstrated through experiments involving interference. If participants are asked to remember a set of letters, then immediately given a math problem to solve, Their ability to recall the letters drops sharply. The math task displaces the fragile memory trace. This is why distractions are so disruptive when we're trying to remember something in the moment. A ringing phone, a sudden noise, a new task, any of these can cause the information to vanish before it ever has a chance to become lasting. The neural basis of short-term memory involves activation in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for attention, planning, and executive function. Unlike long-term memory, which relies on changes in synaptic strength and structure, short-term memory is thought to depend on sustained neural activity. As long as certain neurons continue to fire in a particular pattern, the memory remains active. When the firing stops, the memory vanishes. This makes short-term memory fast and flexible, but also inherently unstable. There is debate among scientists about where short-term memory ends and working memory begins. The two are closely related, and in some contexts, the terms are used interchangeably. But many researchers define working memory as a more complex system, one that not only holds information temporarily but manipulates it. If short-term memory is the brain's notepad, working memory is its workspace. It allows you to hold numbers in mind while calculating their sum, to compare two sentences for meaning, to consider multiple possibilities at once. Working memory involves not just storage, but active processing. This distinction matters because working memory is more predictive of cognitive ability than almost any other mental function. It is closely linked to intelligence, problem-solving, reasoning, and learning. People with stronger working memory capacity tend to perform better in academic and professional settings. They can juggle more information, resist distraction, and maintain focus over time. But working memory is also more susceptible to stress, fatigue, and emotional disturbance. Anxiety, for example, can occupy part of working memory with intrusive thoughts, reducing the capacity available for other tasks. In everyday life, short-term memory is constantly in motion. We use it to remember where we parked the car, what someone just said, the next step in a recipe, the name of the person we were just introduced to. Most of this information will not make it into long-term storage. It will vanish as soon as it's no longer needed. But that does not make it unimportant. These transient memories are the glue that holds our experience together. They allow us to function in real time, to move through the world with coherence and purpose. Sometimes, short-term memory can fail in striking ways. Certain neurological conditions, such as transient global amnesia, can cause a sudden, temporary loss of the ability to form new short-term memories. People affected may repeatedly ask the same questions, unable to remember the answers they just received. In other cases, brain injury or disease may impair short-term memory more gradually, as in some forms of dementia. These disruptions can be deeply disorienting, severing the bridge between the present moment and the next. Despite its limitations, short-term memory is not fixed. It can be trained and improved. Techniques like mindfulness meditation, which strengthens attention, can enhance the ability to hold information in mind. Cognitive exercises, memory games, and even physical activity have been shown to support short-term memory function. While we may never be able to hold more than a handful of items at once, we can become better at focusing, chunking, and managing what we hold. Short-term memory is the front line of cognition. It is where perception meets thought, where sensation becomes usable, where the present is assembled before it fades into the past. It is not as glamorous as long-term memory, which holds our life stories and deepest truths, but it is just as essential. Without it, we would be blind to continuity, trapped in a sea of disconnected impressions. With it, we can think, speak, plan, and act. We can live not just moment to moment, but across moments, stretching awareness over time, like a thread pulled taut between now and soon. In the next part, We will delve deeper into working memory, the brain's mental workspace, and explore how it allows us not just to hold information, but to shape it. Where short-term memory records, working memory reasons. It is here that the mind begins to act, to solve, to imagine, and it is here that memory becomes not just storage, but strategy. 6. Working memory, the mental workbench. If short-term memory is the notepad of the mind, then working memory is the entire desk, the surface where thoughts are arranged, rearranged, manipulated, and transformed into action. It is the crucible of cognition, the space where we hold information temporarily, not just to remember it, but to do something with it. Whether solving a math problem in your head, following multi-step directions, composing a sentence while speaking, or imagining the outcome of a decision, you are using working memory. It is invisible, effortless in appearance, yet it is one of the most powerful and crucial systems in the human brain, and it is working all the time. The distinction between short-term memory and working memory is subtle but significant. Short-term memory refers to the passive holding of information, a phone number, a list of words, a sequence of digits. Working memory, by contrast, involves the active manipulation of that information. It is not just remembering the phone number, but using it to cross-check a contact list, enter it into a database, or reverse the digits aloud. It is what allows us to reason, to plan, to organize. It is where thought takes shape before becoming speech or action. Working memory operates in real time. Its contents are ephemeral, lasting only seconds unless rehearsed or encoded into long-term memory. But during that brief lifespan, those mental contents can be sorted, compared, altered, and restructured. It is the difference between memorizing a grocery list and mentally calculating the total cost as you shop. It is the capacity not only to recall pieces of information, but to relate them to each other, to analyze, synthesize, evaluate. In this way, working memory is not merely a storage system. It is a workspace, a place of mental construction. One of the most widely accepted models of working memory was proposed by British psychologist Alan Baddeley. In this model, working memory consists of multiple components: the phonological loop, which handles verbal and auditory information; the visuospatial sketchpad, which manages visual and spatial data; and the central executive, which coordinates attention and controls the flow of information between these systems. Later, a fourth component was added, the episodic buffer, which integrates information across domains and connects working memory to long-term memory. The phonological loop is responsible for holding sounds in mind. When you rehearse a phone number by repeating it to yourself or silently read a sentence, you are engaging this system. It includes a phonological store, which holds sounds for a few seconds, and an articulatory rehearsal process, which refreshes those sounds to keep them active. This is why information held in the phonological loop is vulnerable to verbal interference. If someone starts talking to you while you're trying to remember a list of words, the new auditory input can overwrite what you were holding. The visuospatial sketchpad, on the other hand, deals with images, locations, and spatial relationships. It is what allows you to navigate a familiar environment in your mind, to visualize a shape rotating in space, or to remember where you left your keys. Artists, architects, and athletes often have particularly strong visuospatial working memory. Like the phonological loop, the sketchpad is limited in capacity. It can hold only a few items at once and is susceptible to visual interference. At the heart of the system is the central executive. This is the manager of working memory, the component that directs attention, inhibits distractions, switches between tasks, and decides what information to prioritize. It has no storage capacity of its own, but it controls the use of the other components. The central executive is what allows you to do mental math while resisting the urge to check your phone. It is what helps you maintain a conversation while navigating traffic. It is closely tied to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain most associated with executive function, self-control, and higher-order reasoning. The episodic buffer, the most recent addition to the model, acts as a bridge between working memory and long-term memory. It allows different types of information to be combined into a coherent episode or narrative. For example, when you recall a specific event from your past, say, a birthday party, you may remember the sights, sounds, emotions, and spatial layout all at once. The episodic buffer integrates these elements and helps maintain them in consciousness as a single experience. Working memory capacity varies from person to person and is strongly predictive of performance in a wide range of cognitive tasks. It is linked to reading comprehension, problem-solving ability, language development, and even general intelligence. People with high working memory capacity can hold and manipulate more information at once, and are better at filtering out irrelevant distractions. But working memory is also sensitive to stress, fatigue, and emotional disturbance. Anxiety, for example, can occupy working memory with intrusive thoughts, reducing the capacity available for the task at hand. This is why test anxiety or stage fright can impair performance even when the person knows the material. The limitations of working memory are apparent in daily life. Most people can only juggle a few pieces of information at once. Too many tasks, too many distractions, and the system becomes overloaded. This cognitive bottleneck explains why multitasking is often inefficient. Each switch between tasks imposes a cost, time, energy, and a risk of forgetting. While it may feel productive to answer emails while attending a Zoom meeting and writing a report, the brain can truly focus on only one complex task at a time. The others suffer. Despite its constraints, working memory is remarkably adaptable. It draws on long-term memory to reduce cognitive load. For instance, a skilled musician reading sheet music is not interpreting each note as an isolated symbol. They are seeing patterns, phrases, and familiar sequences. Their expertise reduces the demand on working memory by allowing them to process larger chunks of information. The same is true for chess masters, mathematicians, and seasoned cooks. Practice and knowledge shape how efficiently the workspace operates. Working memory can also be trained, to some extent. Certain cognitive training programs aim to improve working memory through exercises that challenge its limits. The evidence is mixed. Some studies show modest improvements, especially in children and older adults, while others suggest that gains are task-specific and do not generalize. Still, mindfulness, physical exercise, sleep, and focused attention have all been shown to support working memory performance. Reducing distractions, simplifying tasks, and using external aids like notes or visual reminders can also help optimize working memory function. Working memory is essential not only for cognition but for self-regulation. It allows us to pause before reacting, to hold goals in mind, to resist temptation, and to plan ahead. It is the seat of deliberation, the place where emotion meets reason. When it falters, so does our ability to act with intention. Disorders such as ADHD and schizophrenia are often associated with impairments in working memory. These deficits can affect not just academic or professional success, but relationships, decision-making, and quality of life. In the end, working memory is where consciousness does its heaviest lifting. It is the stage on which the mind performs, the mental space where thought is sculpted in real time. It allows us to carry the past forward, to project ourselves into the future, and to hold the present in all its complexity. It is transient, fragile, and limited, yet it enables some of our most powerful capacities. It is the arena of awareness, the architecture of thought. Next, we will move beyond the fleeting world of working memory and into the deeper vaults of long-term memory. We will explore how memories are stabilized, stored, and recalled across the years, and how they become the foundation of our knowledge, our skills, and our sense of self. Where working memory constructs, long-term memory preserves, it is in those vast hidden chambers that the story of your life is kept. 7. Long-term memory, the deep vaults of the mind. Beneath the fleeting surface of thoughts and impressions lies a vast subterranean archive. Long-term memory, unlike its short-term and working counterparts, stretches across time. It holds not just seconds or minutes, but years, decades, and sometimes an entire lifetime of experience. It is the deep vault of the mind, where the knowledge of who we are, what we've learned, and where we've been is preserved. In this great library of the self are etched the faces of loved ones, the rules of arithmetic, the echo of a song from childhood, and the silent weight of memories too painful to speak aloud. Long-term memory is not merely where facts are stored, it is where meaning lives. This system is not a monolith, but a complex and multi-layered structure. Within it, different kinds of memories reside in different regions of the brain and serve different purposes. Some memories are explicit, conscious, intentional recollections of people, places, and events. Others are implicit, unconscious, automatic traces that influence our actions without ever entering awareness. This dual architecture reflects the many roles memory must play to help us recall and to help us respond. Explicit or declarative memory can be divided into two subtypes: episodic and semantic. Episodic memory is the memory of experience. It is autobiographical, grounded in time and place. When you remember your first day of school, the smell of chalk, the nervous flutter in your stomach, the sound of your name being called, that is episodic memory at work. These memories are rich with detail and emotion. They form the narrative of your life. Semantic memory, by contrast, is the memory of knowledge. It is not tied to personal experience, but to the facts and concepts you have absorbed over time. That Paris is the capital of France, that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, that a triangle has 3 sides. These are semantic memories. They are learned, reinforced, and often so deeply ingrained that you cannot recall when or how you acquired them. Implicit memory operates beneath the surface. It includes procedural memory skills and habits that you perform automatically, like riding a bike or typing on a keyboard. It also includes conditioning, priming, and other forms of unconscious influence. You don't think about how to pedal or where the keys are. Your body remembers. This kind of memory is deeply embedded, often more resistant to damage or decay. It is procedural memory that allows a pianist with Alzheimer's to sit at a keyboard and play a song flawlessly, even if they no longer remember learning it. The consolidation of long-term memories, the process by which they are stabilized and stored, depends on several key brain structures, most notably the hippocampus. This seahorse-shaped region in the medial temporal lobe acts as a sort of memory index. When a new memory is formed, the hippocampus binds together the various sensory and emotional elements scattered across the brain. Over time, through repeated activation and sleep-facilitated reprocessing, the memory becomes less dependent on the hippocampus and more firmly rooted in the cortex. This slow migration is known as systems consolidation. It explains why damage to the hippocampus often impairs the formation of new memories, anterograde amnesia, while leaving older memories intact. Emotion plays a crucial role in long-term memory. Experiences that are emotionally charged, whether joyful or traumatic, are more likely to be remembered. The amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center, enhances memory encoding by signaling the importance of an event: a car accident, a birth, a breakup, a public triumph. These moments are seared into memory, not because they are inherently more memorable, but because the brain judged them to be significant. This can be adaptive, helping us remember threats or rewards. But it also means that emotionally intense experiences can linger, sometimes painfully, even when we would rather forget. Not all long-term memories are equally accessible. Some lie close to the surface, ready to be recalled at will. Others are buried, dormant, until the right cue or context brings them forth. Retrieval cues can take many forms: a scent, a song, a phrase, a location. These cues act like keys, unlocking stored memories by reactivating the neural networks in which they are encoded. This is why a familiar melody can transport you back decades in an instant. The memory was always there, waiting, silent, intact. But retrieval is not a perfect process. Each time a memory is recalled, it becomes temporarily unstable, a phenomenon known as reconsolidation. During this window, the memory can be altered by new information, emotion, or suggestion. The memory is then stored again in its modified form. This makes memory dynamic and adaptable, but also fallible. Over time, stories change. Details shift. False elements may be added. This is not lying, it is the natural plasticity of memory. We remember not the event itself, but the last time we remembered it. Long-term memory is not only a record of the past, it is a guide for the future. It shapes how we make decisions, form relationships, learn new skills, and construct identity. It provides the continuity that gives life coherence. Without it, we would live in a perpetual present, with no way to anchor ourselves. We would wake up each morning without knowing who we are, what we love, or what we fear. Long-term memory gives us a self, yet even this great system is vulnerable. Aging, disease, trauma, and injury can erode its pathways. Alzheimer's disease, in particular, strikes at the core of long-term memory, progressively destroying the ability to form new memories while hollowing out the old. Early on, recent events disappear. Over time, the past itself is stripped away. Eventually, only fragments remain, and even those begin to fade. Watching a loved one descend into this forgetting is a slow heartbreak, a reminder of how tightly identity and memory are woven. But even in its fragility, long-term memory is a marvel. The sheer volume of information it can store is staggering. The brain is estimated to hold up to a quadrillion bytes of information equivalent to over 1 million gigabytes. And yet, for all its complexity, this system operates largely beneath awareness. We do not consciously store memories. We do not choose which ones will last. The brain decides, based on salience, repetition, emotion, and context. And so we live our lives not as single moments, but as a continuous unfolding of remembered experience. We are shaped not only by what happens to us, but by what we carry forward, the joys and wounds, the lessons and regrets, the people and places that linger in our minds. All of it forms the deep vault of who we are. To know your memories is to know your story. To protect them is to protect your soul. In the next part, we will explore how long-term memories are retrieved, how the brain finds what it has stored, and how it sometimes fails. We will examine the mechanisms of recall and recognition, the role of context and cues, and the strange phenomenon of remembering something that never truly happened. For memory is not only the preservation of the past, it is the continuous act of reconstruction. And in that reconstruction lies both power and peril. 8. Retrieval, the search for the past. Memory retrieval is one of the most fascinating and mysterious operations of the human mind. It is the moment when the past is brought back into the present, when something once experienced, learned, or felt is summoned from the depths of the mind and briefly held in consciousness once more. Retrieval is what allows you to remember your childhood friend's name, to solve a problem based on something you learned in school, or to recall the face of a loved one long gone. It is a bridge that connects now with then. But the act of retrieving a memory is not simple. It is not like opening a drawer and pulling out a file. It is more like reconstructing a scene from scattered fragments, piecing together sensory details, emotions, language, and spatial cues to recreate an internal version of what once was. There are different forms of retrieval. Sometimes it is deliberate, what psychologists call recall. This is what happens when you try to remember a list of items, a speech, a date in history, or the sequence of events in a story. Other times, retrieval is recognition. This occurs when a cue is provided, such as seeing a familiar face or reading a multiple-choice answer, and you must determine whether it matches something stored in your memory. Recognition is typically easier than recall because the presence of cues helps trigger the stored information. It's easier to recognize the name of a song than to sing it from memory, but even recognition is not always reliable. Memory is not a perfect record of the past. Every time a memory is retrieved, it is not just recalled, it is rebuilt. The process is fluid, influenced by present circumstances, mood, expectations, and even social context. When you remember your first day at school, your mind may fill in missing details or reshape the event based on who you've become or what others have told you. This reconstruction is often unconscious. We don't realize we're altering the memory. It simply feels real. One of the most powerful influences on retrieval is the presence of retrieval cues. A retrieval cue is anything that triggers a memory. It can be external, like a place, a smell, a sound, or an object. It can also be internal, such as a particular mood or thought. The more closely a cue matches the conditions under which the memory was originally encoded, the more likely it is to lead to successful recall. This phenomenon is known as encoding specificity. For example, if you studied for a test in a quiet room, and then take the test in a similarly quiet room, your chances of recalling the material improve. The environment acts as a cue, aligning your mental state with the one present during learning. Closely related is the concept of state-dependent memory. This refers to the tendency to recall information more easily when you are in the same physical or emotional state as when the memory was formed. If you were sad when you learned something, you are more likely to remember it when you are sad again. If you were anxious, those memories may come flooding back the next time anxiety strikes. This can be helpful, but it can also lead to distress, as traumatic memories may be more easily accessed when emotional states are similar to those during the trauma. Context also plays a role in memory retrieval. Being in the same physical location where something happened can enhance recall. This is why returning to your childhood home can trigger vivid memories, or why walking into a room can make you suddenly remember why you went there. The brain uses context as a map, orienting itself within a network of associations to find the memory it seeks. This is also why certain smells or songs can instantly transport you back to a specific moment. The sensory input acts like a beacon, guiding the mind through the fog of time. Despite the brain's remarkable capacity to retrieve information, retrieval is not always successful. Everyone has experienced the tip of the tongue phenomenon, the frustrating feeling of knowing a word or name but being unable to retrieve it. You can feel it hovering just out of reach, and sometimes it emerges hours later when you're no longer thinking about it. This delay highlights the complex and sometimes fragile pathways involved in memory retrieval. The information is there, but the access route has become obscured. Interference is one of the major culprits in retrieval failure. There are two types of interference: proactive and retroactive. Proactive interference occurs when old information hinders the recall of new information. For example, if you've always parked your car in one spot and suddenly start parking in a new one, your memory may keep dragging you back to the old location. Retroactive interference is the opposite. New information makes it harder to remember old information. If you change your phone number, you may soon forget the old one, especially if you rarely use it. In both cases, the brain's attempt to manage competing traces of memory can lead to confusion or forgetting. Retrieval can also be disrupted by stress, fatigue, distraction, or illness. These factors reduce the brain's ability to access and coordinate memory networks. High-stress situations, in particular, can impair retrieval in the moment. This is why someone might blank out during a presentation, forget a familiar route while panicking, or struggle to remember information during an exam. Ironically, the memory often returns when the pressure is lifted, revealing that it was never truly lost, just temporarily inaccessible. One of the more curious aspects of retrieval is that it strengthens the memory itself. Each time you successfully retrieve a memory, you reinforce the neural connections that support it. This is known as the testing effect, and it's why retrieval practice is one of the most effective learning strategies. When you quiz yourself, recall a fact, or teach someone else what you know, you are not just proving that you remember, you are deepening the memory's roots. Repeated retrieval makes the memory more accessible and more resistant to forgetting. Yet this power to reinforce comes with a price. Every retrieval is also a chance to modify the memory. During the reconsolidation phase, the brief window after a memory has been recalled, the trace is malleable. It can be reshaped by new information, emotion, or context before being stored again. This means that memory is not just susceptible to decay or interference. A story retold over and over may slowly shift, with details exaggerated, diminished, or added. This happens not because we are dishonest, but because memory itself is a living process, shaped by repetition. This has profound implications, especially in legal contexts. Eyewitness testimony, once considered highly reliable, is now understood to be prone to error. Suggestive questioning, the passage of time, and repeated retellings can alter what a witness remembers. People can become convinced of events that never occurred. This does not mean that memory is useless. It remains one of our most vital tools, but it must be approached with humility. We must remember that remembering is never perfect. Still, the ability to retrieve our past gives us continuity. It connects us to who we were, informs who we are, and helps shape who we might become. It allows us to learn from experience, revisit joy, heal from sorrow, and share our stories with others. Even when the details shift, the act of remembering holds power. In seeking the past, we affirm the present. We weave a thread through time, binding ourselves to moments long gone, yet somehow still alive. In the next part, we will examine what happens when retrieval fails completely, not due to interference or stress, but because the memory itself has begun to disappear. We will explore the science of forgetting, the reasons it occurs, and why, in some cases, forgetting is not a flaw but a necessity. For the brain, to forget is sometimes as important as to remember. 9. Forgetting, the silent architecture of the mind. Forgetting is often viewed as a failure, a betrayal of the mind's promise to preserve what we've lived and learned. We forget names, appointments, details of conversations, entire events. We search for lost memories as if they were stolen, misplaced by some internal thief. Yet forgetting is not simply a flaw in the system. It is part of the system. It is a feature of memory, not merely a defect. Without forgetting, the mind would be overwhelmed by irrelevance. Every detail, every image, every passing sensation would remain equally vivid and equally present. There would be no hierarchy, no prioritization, no clarity. To understand forgetting is to understand that memory is not a vault, but a living, adaptive process shaped as much by omission as by preservation. The process of forgetting begins almost immediately. Studies have shown that, within minutes of learning new information, a significant portion is already lost. This phenomenon was first measured by Hermann Ebbinghaus in the late 19th century, using himself as the subject in meticulous experiments with nonsense syllables. He discovered what is now known as the forgetting curve, a steep decline in recall over time, which levels off gradually. Without reinforcement or rehearsal, most information fades rapidly from conscious memory. This decline is not random. It follows a predictable pattern, indicating that the brain is actively pruning rather than passively losing data. There are several theories that attempt to explain why forgetting occurs. One of the most widely accepted is decay theory. This model suggests that memories weaken over time due to the natural fading of the neurochemical traces that hold them. Like ink evaporating from paper, the signal degrades, especially if not reactivated. This is particularly relevant for short-term or working memory, where information is maintained through ongoing neural activity. When that activity ceases, the memory trace dissipates. However, decay alone cannot explain all instances of forgetting, especially in long-term memory, where structural changes in the brain are thought to encode information more permanently. Interference theory offers a more nuanced view. It posits that forgetting results from competition between memories. When similar pieces of information are stored in the brain, they can interfere with each other, making retrieval more difficult. Proactive interference occurs when older memories hinder the recall of newer ones. Retroactive interference is the reverse. New memories obscure or replace old ones. This can be observed in everyday life. Learning a new phone number can make it harder to remember the old one. Studying multiple languages at once can cause grammatical confusion. The brain's efforts to manage similarity can lead to unintended losses. Another explanation is retrieval failure. In this case, the memory is intact, but inaccessible. The information is there, hidden within the neural landscape, but the right cues are missing. It's like having a book in a vast library with no idea which shelf it's on. This is the mechanism behind the tip of the tongue phenomenon, where you are certain you know something but cannot bring it to mind. Often, the memory returns unexpectedly later, triggered by a word, a face, or a shift in mental state. Retrieval failure illustrates that forgetting is not always about absence. It can be about misplacement. There is also motivated forgetting, a process by which the mind deliberately suppresses certain memories. This can be conscious, as when we try to forget an embarrassing moment or a painful relationship, or unconscious, as in the repression of traumatic events. While the concept of repressed memory remains controversial and complex, there is evidence that the brain can inhibit unwanted memories through active mechanisms. The prefrontal cortex, involved in executive control, plays a role in dampening the retrieval of distressing material. This ability may serve a protective function, allowing individuals to cope with overwhelming experiences. However, suppressed memories can sometimes resurface, often in altered or fragmented form. Forgetting also serves an adaptive purpose. It is the brain's way of clearing clutter, streamlining cognition, and making room for what matters most. Imagine if you remembered every advertisement you saw, every face in a crowd, every mundane detail of every day. The result would be cognitive overload, an inability to distinguish the relevant from the irrelevant. Forgetting helps shape the architecture of the mind, allowing it to focus, prioritize, and generalize. It is essential for learning. To build new knowledge, the brain must sometimes let go of old patterns. To see clearly, it must look away from what no longer serves. This perspective is supported by the concept of active forgetting, a process by which the brain appears to deliberately eliminate certain memories. Recent research suggests that specific molecular and cellular mechanisms are involved in this process. Proteins like pepone and racone have been implicated in the weakening of synaptic connections that support memory traces. In animal studies, interference with these pathways can lead to enhanced memory retention, or conversely, to impaired forgetting. This points to forgetting not as a passive loss, but as an active function. Guided by biology, forgetting is also deeply tied to emotion. Highly emotional experiences are often remembered more vividly and for longer periods. But the emotional context can also influence what is forgotten. Stress hormones like cortisol can impair memory encoding and retrieval, especially under conditions of chronic stress. In some cases, traumatic memories may become fragmented or dissociated, making them difficult to access. At the same time, emotionally neutral events are more likely to fade quickly unless they are reinforced. Emotion acts as a filter, shaping what is retained and what is discarded. Age brings its own patterns of forgetting. As people grow older, they may notice more frequent lapses in memory, forgetting names, misplacing items, struggling to recall specific details. While some of this is normal and benign, linked to changes in attention and processing speed, other patterns may signal neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease. In such cases, forgetting becomes pathological, a symptom of broader cognitive decline. The distinction lies not just in how much is forgotten, but in what types of memory are affected and how consistently. Understanding this distinction is key to recognizing early signs of memory disorders. Yet, even in healthy aging, forgetting can have surprising benefits. Older adults often recall positive experiences more readily than negative ones, a phenomenon known as the positivity effect. This suggests that forgetting may be shaped not only by biology but by emotional goals. As people age, they may become more selective in what they remember, focusing on what brings meaning or comfort. This selective remembering and forgetting reflects the deeper role of memory in shaping the narrative of life. Culturally, forgetting is both feared and ritualized. Societies build monuments and memorials to resist the erosion of memory, while also constructing ceremonies of letting go. The act of forgetting can be a communal process, choosing not to dwell, choosing to move forward. In this way, memory and forgetting are not just individual experiences, but collective ones. What a culture remembers or forgets its histories, its traumas, its heroes and victims, shapes its identity, just as personal memory shapes the self. To forget, then, is not merely to lose. It is to prune, to prioritize, to evolve. It is a form of mental housekeeping, a way for the mind to remain agile and focused in a world of endless input. It can be painful, as when the names and faces of loved ones begin to blur. It can be protective, shielding us from overwhelming pain. It can be practical, making space for what lies ahead. And it can be beautiful, in its own quiet way, a testament to the mind's ability to change, to heal, to grow. In the next part, we will turn to one of the most unsettling aspects of memory, its capacity for illusion. We will explore the phenomenon of false memories, how the brain can fabricate events that never happened, insert details that were never there, and convince us of their truth. For memory is not just fragile, it is imaginative. And sometimes, it tells stories that are more fiction than fact. 10. False memories. The mind's fiction. There is something deeply unsettling about realizing that not all memories are real. We tend to think of memory as a reliable record of the past, a mental archive we can consult to verify what happened, how we felt, and who was there. Yet the reality is far more complex and disorienting. Memory is not a camera. It does not record life with perfect fidelity. Instead, it reconstructs, interprets, and reshapes experience every time we recall it. In this process of reconstruction, errors can be introduced, details can be misremembered, events can be conflated, and entire episodes can be fabricated. These false memories are not just mistakes, they can feel as vivid and convincing as real ones. And that is what makes them so powerful. False memories can arise in many ways. Sometimes they result from simple misattribution. We might remember a story someone else told us, as something we personally experienced, or we might recall an imagined event as if it really happened. This is more common than we might think. Studies have shown that people can be led to believe they took a hot air balloon ride as a child, visited a place they never went, or even committed a crime they didn't commit simply through suggestion and the presentation of fabricated evidence. In these cases, the brain fills in gaps in memory with imagined details, stitching them together into a coherent narrative. The resulting memory feels true because it follows the rules of memory. It is detailed, emotionally engaging, and seems to come from a personal point of view. One of the most famous researchers in this area is Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, whose groundbreaking experiments revealed the ease with which false memories can be implanted. In one study, participants were shown a doctored photo of themselves as a child, standing in a hot air balloon. Despite having no memory of such an event, many came to believe it had really happened. They even added details: who was with them, how they felt, what the weather was like. Loftus's work demonstrated that memory is highly suggestible, and that the act of recalling a memory can actually change it. The mechanism behind this is reconsolidation, the process by which a memory, once retrieved, becomes temporarily malleable before being stored again. During this window, new information can be incorporated into the memory trace. If a person is exposed to misleading information, such as a suggestion that they saw a stop sign when it was really a yield sign, that misinformation can overwrite the original memory. This is why eyewitness testimony, once considered the gold standard in legal proceedings, is now viewed with far more caution. Witnesses are often confident but mistaken, not because they are lying, but because their memories have been altered by questioning, media coverage, or their own imagination. False memories can also emerge from internal processes. Dreams, daydreams, and fantasies can sometimes be confused with real events, especially if they are rehearsed or repeated over time. The brain does not always tag memories with a source, and over time, we may forget whether a memory came from personal experience, a movie, a book, or a conversation. This source confusion is a fertile ground for false memories. When a dream is particularly vivid or emotionally charged, it may be stored in a similar way to real experiences. Later, when the memory surfaces, it feels authentic, even if it originated entirely in the imagination. Children are particularly susceptible to false memories, as their brains are still developing and they are more influenced by authority figures. In suggestive environments such as during leading interviews or therapy sessions, children may come to believe they experienced things they did not. This has led to significant controversy, particularly in cases of alleged abuse, where memories recovered during therapy were later shown to be inaccurate. While it is important not to dismiss real trauma, these cases highlight the ethical and legal dangers of manipulating memory through suggestion. Emotion plays a critical role in the formation of false memories. Highly emotional events are more likely to be remembered, but they are also more prone to distortion. When we recall a traumatic or deeply meaningful experience, we may unconsciously exaggerate certain elements or suppress others. Over time, the story changes, and we come to believe the new version as truth. This can happen with both positive and negative memories. A childhood vacation may become more idyllic in memory than it ever was. A conflict with a friend may take on greater intensity than the original event justified. The emotions associated with a memory shape not only what we recall, but how we interpret it. Interestingly, the brain processes false memories in ways that are neurologically similar to true ones. Neuroimaging studies have shown that when people recall false memories, many of the same brain regions are activated as when they recall real ones, particularly areas involved in visual imagery and emotional processing. This may explain why false memories feel so real. The brain does not easily distinguish between memories based on their accuracy. It responds to their structure and content, not their truth. False memories also raise philosophical questions about identity and the nature of reality. If our memories can be altered or fabricated, to what extent can we trust our own sense of self? Much of who we are is based on what we remember our beliefs, relationships, traumas, and triumphs. If some of those memories are false, does that make our identity any less valid? Or is memory, in all its imperfection, still a legitimate foundation for the self? Perhaps the answer lies in recognizing that all memory is, to some extent, a story, and stories, even when embellished, can carry meaning. In some cases, false memories can be beneficial. They can help us cope with guilt, loss, or failure. They can soften the harsh edges of the past and allow us to move forward. Nostalgia, for instance, often relies on idealized memories that may not reflect reality. Yet these memories bring comfort and coherence to our lives. The brain does not always prioritize accuracy. It prioritizes survival, emotion, and coherence. It edits the past to serve the present, crafting a version of reality that feels livable. Yet the danger of false memories cannot be ignored. They can lead to false accusations, broken relationships, and distorted self-perceptions. When people believe in memories that never occurred, their actions and emotions are shaped by fiction. This is why critical thinking, corroboration, and an understanding of memory's limitations are so important. The more we know about how memory works, the better we can guard against its illusions. Ultimately, false memories reveal the creative nature of the human mind. Memory is not a passive recorder but an active storyteller. It draws from fact, emotion, imagination, and context to build the narrative of our lives. Sometimes it gets the details wrong. Sometimes it invents entirely. But always, it seeks coherence. It seeks meaning. And in that pursuit, it blurs the line between what was and what might have been. In the next part, we will explore one of the most critical regions involved in memory formation and retrieval, the hippocampus. We will examine its unique role in binding experiences, its vulnerability to injury, and its central place in the mystery of memory itself. For if memory is the story, the hippocampus is the storyteller. 11. The hippocampus, gatekeeper of memory. Deep within the brain, nestled in the medial temporal lobe and curled like a seahorse on either side of the hemispheres, lies the hippocampus, a structure so vital to memory that damage to it can erase the very fabric of one's lived experience. Its name, derived from the Greek words for horse and sea monster, hints at both its shape and its mysterious importance. Despite its relatively small size, the hippocampus plays a monumental role in the encoding, consolidation, and retrieval of memories. Without it, we would be untethered in time, unable to record the present or revisit the past. It is the gatekeeper of memory, guiding the passage of experience into permanence. The central function of the hippocampus is to bind elements of experience into a coherent memory trace. Every moment we live is a tapestry of sights, sounds, smells, emotions, and spatial context. These components are processed in different regions of the brain, but the hippocampus gathers them together and weaves them into a single, unified episode. When you remember your grandmother's kitchen, the scent of cinnamon, the warmth of the oven, the sound of her laughter, it is the hippocampus that has orchestrated that ensemble. This process is known as pattern binding, and it is fundamental to the formation of episodic memories. Episodic memory is the ability to recall specific events from our lives, situated in time and place. It is distinct from semantic memory, which involves general knowledge divorced from context. While both types of memory rely on multiple brain regions, episodic memory is especially dependent on the hippocampus. Studies of patients with hippocampal damage, such as the famous case of Henry Molaison, known as HM, have shown that when the hippocampus is compromised, the ability to form new episodic memories is dramatically impaired. HM could remember events from his early life, but was unable to create new memories after his hippocampi were surgically removed to treat epilepsy. He lived in a continuous present, repeating the same questions, meeting the same people for the first time again and again. His case was tragic, but it illuminated the essential role the hippocampus plays in recording experience. The hippocampus does not store memories indefinitely. Rather, it acts as an index or coordinator. When a new experience is encoded, the hippocampus links together the various cortical regions that represent different aspects of the memory. Over time, through a process called systems consolidation, the memory becomes less dependent on the hippocampus and more reliant on direct connections within the cortex. This gradual transfer allows memories to become more stable and enduring. However, if the hippocampus is damaged before consolidation is complete, those memories may be lost. This indexing function also explains the hippocampus's role in memory retrieval. When a memory is recalled, the hippocampus reactivates the pattern of neural activity associated with the original experience. It serves as a kind of conductor, cueing the orchestra of the mind to replay a familiar symphony. This is especially important for contextual recall, remembering not just what happened, but where, when, and with whom. The hippocampus supports our ability to mentally time travel, to place ourselves back in a moment with vivid, sensory, and emotional detail. The hippocampus is also deeply involved in spatial memory and navigation. This was first observed in studies of London taxi drivers, who must memorize the city's complex network of streets known as the knowledge. Brain scans revealed that these drivers had significantly larger posterior hippocampi than average, correlating with their extensive spatial training. Within the hippocampus are specialized cells called place cells, which become active when an individual is in or thinks about a specific location. These cells form part of a broader network that creates cognitive maps, allowing us to navigate the physical world and remember our place within it. Interestingly, the hippocampus is not only a structure of memory, but of imagination. Functional imaging studies have shown that when people imagine future events, visualize fictional scenarios, or construct possible alternatives to past actions, the hippocampus is engaged. This suggests that memory and imagination are not separate systems but deeply intertwined. To remember is to imagine, and to imagine is to recombine elements of memory. This capacity allows us not just to recall what has been, but to simulate what could be. It is at the heart of planning, creativity, and even empathy. Despite its resilience, the hippocampus is vulnerable to damage. It is particularly sensitive to oxygen deprivation, inflammation, chronic stress, and trauma. Prolonged exposure to high levels of cortisol, the body's stress hormone, can impair hippocampal function and reduce its volume. This may explain why individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or severe anxiety often struggle with memory and spatial orientation. In aging and in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, the hippocampus is one of the first regions to show atrophy. As it shrinks, the ability to form new memories declines, and the continuity of the self begins to erode. One of the more haunting aspects of hippocampal damage is its impact on identity. Without the ability to remember, the self becomes unmoored. A person may retain skills, habits, and language thanks to procedural and semantic memory systems, but the thread of personal history is severed. They may still smile, recognize emotions, or engage in conversation, but they do not know who they are in the narrative sense. They cannot accumulate new experiences into the story of their life. The hippocampus, then, is not just a memory device. It is the storyteller, stitching together moments into meaning, stitching meaning into self. Yet this structure is also remarkably dynamic. Unlike most areas of the adult brain, the hippocampus continues to produce new neurons throughout life in a process called neurogenesis. While the extent and functional significance of adult neurogenesis are still debated, there is evidence that it plays a role in learning, memory, and mood regulation. Factors such as physical exercise, enriched environments, cognitive engagement, and even certain diets can support hippocampal health. Conversely, sedentary behavior, isolation, and chronic stress can inhibit neurogenesis and accelerate decline. The hippocampus, like memory itself, is shaped by how we live. Modern neuroscience continues to probe the hippocampus's mysteries. Advances in imaging, electrophysiology, and optogenetics are revealing the fine-grained mechanisms by which this structure encodes, retrieves, and transforms experience. Researchers are exploring how different subregions of the hippocampus contribute to different types of memory, how hippocampal rhythms coordinate with other brain areas during sleep, and how disruptions in these rhythms may underlie psychiatric and cognitive disorders. The more we learn, the more it becomes clear that the hippocampus is not merely a storage device. It is a hub of cognition, bridging memory, space, imagination, and identity. To lose the hippocampus is to lose a compass, a timeline, a narrative thread. But to understand it is to begin to understand how memory is built not just as a record of what happened, but as a dynamic, living structure that shapes our perception of reality. It is in the hippocampus that the fragments of experience are bound into episodes. It is here that time is organized, space is mapped, and the self is constructed. In the next part, we will explore how memory shapes identity, not just by recording what we have done, but by influencing who we believe ourselves to be. We will delve into the psychology of self-narratives, memory distortions, and the deep connection between what we remember and who we are. For in the end, to remember is to be, and in remembering, we become. 12. Memory and identity, the story we tell ourselves. Memory is not merely a function of cognition, it is the bedrock of identity. It is the silent narrator that tells us who we are, weaving the fabric of the self from the raw threads of experience. Without memory, we would be strangers to ourselves, existing moment to moment without continuity or context. But with memory, we possess a narrative, a sense of past, a vision of future, a character in the middle named I. This self-narrative is not fixed. It is a living document, shaped by what we choose to remember, what we forget, and how we interpret the events that have passed through our lives. Memory, in this way, does not just record identity, it creates it. From early childhood, we begin to develop autobiographical memory, the ability to remember personal experiences in a coherent way. These memories are not isolated snapshots. They are connected into a story that evolves over time. A child remembers not just the day they learned to ride a bicycle, but who was there, how they felt, and how that moment contributed to their growing sense of competence or fear. Each remembered event becomes a scene in the unfolding drama of the self. These memories are not always accurate, but their emotional truth often matters more than their factual precision. They tell us what we value, what we fear, what we believe about ourselves. As we grow older, we begin to organize our memories into larger narratives. We make sense of who we are by looking back at who we were. The awkwardness of adolescence, the triumphs of young adulthood, the challenges of relationships or careers all become part of a mental autobiography that gives our lives coherence. We use this narrative to explain our choices, to justify our actions, to understand our reactions. When someone asks, "Tell me about yourself," we do not list facts, we tell a story. That story is constructed from memory, yet this narrative is selective. We do not remember everything. We remember what fits the story. This selectivity is not deceit, it is necessity. The brain cannot retain every detail, nor would it serve us to do so. Instead, we remember the highlights and the lowlights, the moments of change and meaning. We emphasize events that reinforce our self-image and sometimes suppress those that contradict it. This is why memory is both powerful and perilous. It can lift us up or weigh us down, depending on how it is shaped. A person who sees themselves as a victim may focus on memories of betrayal and injustice. A person who sees themselves as resilient may remember the same events but frame them as tests they overcame. The events did not change. The story did. This self-narrative is not constructed in isolation. It is deeply influenced by culture, family, language, and society. The way we remember ourselves is shaped by the stories we are told, the roles we are expected to play, the values we are taught. A child growing up in a culture that prizes independence may remember acts of autonomy with pride, while one raised in a collectivist society may focus on moments of loyalty and sacrifice. Memory, then, is not just individual, it is social. It is a dialogue between the self and the world, a collaboration between private experience and public meaning. One of the most profound demonstrations of memory's role in identity comes from those who have lost it. In cases of amnesia, whether from injury, illness, or trauma, people often retain basic skills and knowledge, but lose the thread of who they are. They may look in the mirror and not recognize the face they see. They may know how to eat, speak, and walk, but not whether they prefer tea or coffee, not whether they love music or silence. Without memory, preferences have no anchor. Personality has no past, and identity becomes a hollow shell. The body persists, but the person feels gone. Even less severe memory disruptions can shake the foundations of identity. In Alzheimer's disease, for example, memory loss progresses gradually, erasing names, faces, places, and eventually the very concept of self. Loved ones become strangers, daily routines become mysteries, and the individual retreats into a fog where the borders of identity blur. It is a painful process to witness, not only because of what is lost, but because it reveals how fragile the self truly island. What we call me is largely a construct of what we remember. Without it, we drift. Yet memory and identity are not only tied to loss, they are also tied to change. We are not the same person we were 5, 10, or 20 years ago. Our memories evolve, our interpretations shift, and our stories are rewritten. A failure once seen as catastrophic may later be seen as formative. A relationship once thought perfect may later be remembered as toxic. This reinterpretation is not a distortion, it is growth. Memory is not static, it is dynamic, responsive to who we are becoming. It allows us to reframe the past in light of the present. This fluidity has implications for healing. Therapeutic approaches such as narrative therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and trauma-focused interventions often involve revisiting and reworking memories. By changing how a memory is understood, a person can change how it affects them. A traumatic memory that once defined someone as broken can be reframed as evidence of survival. A painful childhood can be seen not just as a source of damage, but as a context for strength. In this way, memory is not just a mirror, it is a tool. It can trap us, but it can also free us. Even our imagined future is shaped by memory. When we think about who we want to become, we draw on who we have been. Our goals, our hopes, our fears, they are extrapolations of past experiences. The same brain networks that are used to recall the past are used to simulate the future. This is why individuals with memory disorders often struggle with foresight and planning. Without a past, the future loses shape. The self is projected forward, using the raw material of what has already been lived. In social relationships, shared memories form the glue of intimacy. Friends reminisce, families tell stories, lovers recall first meetings. These memories create bonds, build trust, and reinforce connection. When two people share a memory, they share a piece of identity. They affirm that they have experienced something together, that they are part of each other's story. Losing those shared memories through distance, conflict, or illness can feel like losing a part of oneself. At the same time, memory can also divide. Disagreements over the past can fracture relationships. Two people may remember the same event differently, each with conviction. These memory conflicts are not just factual disputes, they are clashes of identity. To challenge someone's memory is to challenge their version of themselves. This is why memory is so fiercely defended, and why its distortion can be so painful. Ultimately, memory gives life continuity. It allows us to look back, look ahead, and find meaning in the present. It is not infallible, but it is indispensable. It is not objective, but it is truthful in a deeper sense, truthful to who we are. It tells us where we have come from and suggests where we might go. It helps us navigate joy and sorrow, connection and solitude. It is the whisper that follows us through time, shaping the story we tell ourselves, and in doing so, shaping who we are. In the next part, we will explore how sleep influences memory, how the brain processes, consolidates, and even edits memories while we rest. For memory is not only made in waking life, it is also shaped in the dark. Silent hours of sleep. 13. Sleep and memory. The nighttime archivist. The nighttime archivist. Each night, as consciousness slips away and the body surrenders to stillness, the brain begins its most mysterious and essential work. Sleep is not a passive state, nor is it simply a time of rest. Within the quiet darkness of slumber, the mind becomes an archivist, sifting through the events of the day, deciding what to keep and what to let fade. It replays, reorganizes, strengthens, and sometimes even erases. Sleep is the silent editor of memory, shaping the narrative of who we are through processes hidden from our waking awareness. Without sleep, memories crumble. With it, they solidify, integrate, and prepare us for what lies ahead. The relationship between sleep and memory has long intrigued scientists and philosophers alike. The ancient Greeks believed that dreams were divine messages sent during the vulnerable hours of rest. In the modern era, with the advent of neuroimaging and electrophysiological tools, researchers have uncovered compelling evidence that memory consolidation, the stabilization and integration of newly acquired information, depends heavily on specific phases of sleep. These discoveries have revealed a dynamic interplay between wakefulness and slumber, where experience and memory are not only preserved but refined. Sleep is not a uniform state. It unfolds in cycles, each lasting approximately 90 minutes, rotating through different stages. Light sleep, deep sleep, also known as slow wave sleep, and rapid eye movement, REM sleep. Each stage plays a distinct role in memory processing. During slow wave sleep, the brain exhibits slow, high amplitude delta waves, indicating a state of deep restoration. This stage is particularly important for consolidating declarative memories, facts, events, and experiences that can be consciously recalled. It is during this phase that the hippocampus, the brain's memory hub, reactivates patterns of neural activity associated with the day's learning. These patterns are then replayed and gradually transferred to the neocortex for long-term storage. This process of hippocampocortical dialogue is not random. It is targeted and highly orchestrated. Researchers have observed that neurons in the hippocampus fire in sequences that mirror the order in which experiences occurred during wakefulness. This replay, occurring during slow-wave sleep, is thought to strengthen synaptic connections and cement the memory trace. In essence, the brain rehearses the memory, carving it more deeply into its architecture. This explains why sleep deprivation severely impairs memory retention. Without the opportunity for this replay, Memories remain fragile and easily lost. REM sleep, on the other hand, is marked by rapid eye movements, vivid dreams, and brain activity resembling wakefulness. It is closely linked to emotional memory and creativity. While slow-wave sleep consolidates factual content, REM sleep processes the emotional tone of memories, helping us make sense of what matters and what does not. It is during REM sleep that the amygdala, the brain's emotional center, interacts with the hippocampus to integrate emotion-laden experiences. This may explain why emotionally intense events are often accompanied by vivid dreams, or why a good night's sleep can help reduce the sting of a painful memory without erasing its content. REM sleep is also believed to support the abstraction and generalization of knowledge. In other words, it helps us not just remember facts but extract patterns and insights. This is why sleep can enhance problem-solving, creative thinking, and the ability to make connections between seemingly unrelated ideas. Artists, scientists, and inventors have long reported breakthroughs occurring after a night's rest, or even within a dream. The brain does not merely replay the past during sleep. It reconfigures it, seeking order and meaning. Dreams themselves may play a role in memory processing, though their exact function remains elusive. One theory suggests that dreaming reflects the brain's attempt to integrate new information with existing knowledge. Dreams often blend fragments of recent experience with older memories, symbols, and emotions, creating narratives that are surreal, yet emotionally resonant. While dreams are not necessary for memory consolidation, they may represent the subjective experience of the underlying processes. They are the mind's way of watching itself work. Sleep also plays a role in synaptic homeostasis, a theory that suggests sleep helps maintain balance in the brain's connectivity. During wakefulness, the brain forms new synaptic connections in response to learning and experience. Over time, this growth must be regulated to prevent overload. Sleep provides a window for synaptic downscaling, pruning weaker connections while preserving and strengthening those deemed important. This process not only improves memory efficiency, but also prepares the brain for new learning the next day. In this sense, sleep is not only a time for remembering but for forgetting the intentional shedding of redundant information. The importance of sleep for memory is dramatically illustrated by what happens when sleep is disrupted. Chronic sleep deprivation impairs attention, learning, and recall. Even a single night of poor sleep can reduce the brain's ability to encode new information, particularly in the hippocampus. Sleep disorders such as insomnia, sleep apnea, and narcolepsy are associated with memory deficits and cognitive decline. In older adults, disrupted sleep patterns are linked to the accumulation of amyloid plaques in the brain, a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. The connection between sleep and long-term brain health is now so clear that some researchers refer to sleep as a form of cognitive vaccination, protecting the brain against the ravages of time. Sleep is also deeply intertwined with emotion and mental health. People with depression, anxiety, and PTSD often experience disturbed sleep, which in turn exacerbates memory and mood problems. Nightmares, flashbacks, and fragmented sleep patterns disrupt the brain's ability to process trauma and regulate affect. Therapeutic interventions that improve sleep quality, whether through cognitive behavioral therapy, medication, or lifestyle changes, can lead to improvements in memory, mood, and overall functioning. Sleep, then, is not a luxury but a necessity for emotional integration and resilience. Despite its vital role, modern life often wages war on sleep. Artificial lighting, screen time, irregular schedules, and cultural norms that valorize productivity over rest led to widespread sleep deprivation. We sacrifice sleep to meet deadlines, consume entertainment, or simply stay busy. In doing so, we short-circuit the very system that allows us to learn, grow, and remember. The consequences ripple through education, healthcare, and society at large. Encouraging better sleep, hygiene, consistent schedules, dark and quiet environments, and reduced caffeine and screen exposure can have profound effects on memory and cognitive performance. The future of sleep research promises new insights into how memory is shaped during slumber. Technologies such as targeted memory reactivation, in which specific sounds or cues are used during sleep to enhance certain memories, are being explored. These methods suggest that it may one day be possible to selectively strengthen learning or emotional processing during sleep. Ethical considerations abound, but the potential to enhance memory naturally through sleep is a tantalizing frontier. In sum, sleep is not a pause in consciousness, but a crucible of memory. It is during sleep that the day's chaos is sorted, the past is woven into the tapestry of identity, and the future is quietly prepared. To sleep is to trust the mind with its own repair. It is to let go, so that remembering may take root. In the silent hours, the brain becomes both librarian and storyteller, placing each new memory in its rightful place, erasing what must be forgotten, and dreaming what has yet to be understood. In the next part, we will examine the biology of memory at the cellular level, exploring how neurons, synapses, and molecules give rise to the vast and intricate system of memory. For behind the stories, the dreams, and the self lies a deeper structure, the electrical and chemical dance of life itself. 14. The biology of memory, neurons, synapses, and molecular miracles. Beneath every remembered face, every cherished moment, and every haunting image lies a world of silent pulses and microscopic dances. Memory is not just a psychological experience, it is a biological phenomenon, rooted in the electrical impulses and chemical exchanges of the brain. For all its mystery, memory begins with matter. It begins with neurons, cells that transmit signals through the nervous system, and with synapses, the tiny gaps where those signals leap from one cell to another. It begins with proteins, ions, receptors, and neurotransmitters. The richness of memory, its emotional depth and enduring power, is built upon this delicate scaffold of biology. To understand how we remember is to enter a realm both mechanical and miraculous, where thought itself takes form in physical structures. The brain is composed of roughly 86 billion neurons, each capable of forming thousands of connections with its neighbors. These connections, known as synapses, are the fundamental units of communication in the brain. When we experience something, whether it's seeing a sunset, hearing a song, or learning a new word, neurons fire in specific patterns, and synapses are activated. This neural activity forms the initial trace of memory, a pattern of excitation that reflects the contours of the experience. But this trace is fleeting unless something more occurs, a change at the synapse that renders the connection stronger, more stable, more likely to fire again in the future. This is the principle of synaptic plasticity, the ability of synapses to strengthen or weaken over time in response to activity. It is the biological foundation of learning and memory. The most studied form of synaptic plasticity is long-term potentiation, or LTP. First discovered in the hippocampus in the 1970s, LTP is a long-lasting enhancement in signal transmission between two neurons that results from their simultaneous activation. In simple terms, when two neurons fire together, the connection between them becomes stronger. This principle, often summarized as cells that fire together, wire together, underlies the formation of memory networks in the brain. LTP involves a cascade of molecular events. When an electrical signal travels down the axon of a neuron and reaches the synapse, it triggers the release of neurotransmitters, chemical messengers that cross the synaptic gap. In the case of excitatory synapses, the primary neurotransmitter is glutamate. Glutamate binds to receptors on the receiving neuron, particularly the NMDA and AMPA receptors. The NMDA receptor is especially critical for LTP. It acts as a coincidence detector, requiring both the presence of glutamate and a depolarized membrane to open. When it does, calcium ions flood into the cell, initiating intracellular processes that strengthen the synapse. These processes include the insertion of more AMPA receptors into the synaptic membrane, changes in gene expression, and even structural changes such as the growth of new dendritic spines. These molecular changes translate into more efficient synaptic transmission. The next time the neurons are activated, the signal will travel faster and more reliably. The memory has begun to take hold. Over time, with repeated activation, these changes can become long-lasting. The memory moves from a labile state, dependent on ongoing activity, to a stable trace encoded in the structure and function of neural circuits. But memory is not stored in a single location. It is distributed across networks that span different regions of the brain. Visual aspects of a memory are stored in the visual cortex, auditory aspects in the auditory cortex, emotional components in the amygdala, and contextual information in the hippocampus. The integration of these components is what gives a memory its richness and realism. This integration is achieved through synchronized activity across regions, mediated by oscillatory patterns known as brain waves. Gamma waves, in particular, are associated with memory encoding and retrieval, providing the temporal coordination necessary for neurons to communicate effectively across distances. The consolidation of memory also involves protein synthesis. Once a memory is encoded at the synapse, the process of making it long-lasting requires the production of new proteins. These proteins support the structural changes in the synapse and help stabilize the memory trace. Inhibiting protein synthesis shortly after learning can prevent long-term memory formation, demonstrating the necessity of this molecular activity. This is why certain drugs or conditions that interfere with protein production, such as severe stress or neurological disease, can impair memory. Memory is also subject to regulation by hormones and neuromodulators. Stress hormones like cortisol can either enhance or impair memory, depending on the timing and context. In moderate amounts, cortisol enhances memory consolidation, especially for emotional events. But chronic stress, or excessive cortisol, can damage the hippocampus and disrupt memory formation. On the other hand, neuromodulators like dopamine and acetylcholine play critical roles in attention and learning. Dopamine, associated with reward and motivation, helps prioritize information for memory encoding. Acetylcholine, essential for attention, is particularly active during learning and REM sleep, facilitating the transfer of information from short-term to long-term storage. Despite its robustness, the biological system of memory is not infallible. Synapses can weaken or degrade, receptors can become desensitized, and neurons can die. Neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's target the very structures that support memory. Beta-amyloid plaques and tau tangles interfere with synaptic function, leading to the progressive loss of neurons and the erosion of memory. In these conditions, the biological foundation crumbles, and with it, the mental architecture built upon it. This devastating process reminds us that memory, though powerful, is fragile. It relies on the health of the cells and molecules that support it. Yet the brain is also resilient. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, offers hope. Even in the face of injury or disease, the brain can form new connections and reroute functions. Rehabilitation, cognitive training, and enriched environments can stimulate this plasticity, fostering recovery and adaptation. The biological story of memory is not just one of formation, but of change, loss, and renewal. Recent advances in neuroscience are unlocking even deeper layers of understanding. Techniques like optogenetics, which uses light to control neurons, allow researchers to activate or silence specific memory traces in animal models. This has revealed how memories are stored as engrams, distributed patterns of activity that can be selectively accessed. Meanwhile, CRISPR gene editing tools are being used to study the genetic basis of memory, identifying genes involved in synaptic function and plasticity. These discoveries may one day lead to therapies that enhance memory or prevent its decline. The biology of memory is a testament to the elegance and complexity of life. It reveals how experience becomes embedded in the flesh, how fleeting sensations give rise to enduring knowledge. It shows us that the mind is not separate from the body, but deeply rooted in its mechanisms. Every thought, every recollection, is the product of countless interactions at the cellular and molecular level. In the next part, we will turn to a broader view, examining how collective memory shapes societies, cultures. Just as neurons form networks to hold individual memory, so do people, institutions, and traditions. We will explore how memory becomes history, how stories are passed from generation to generation, and how what we remember together shapes who we become together. 15. Collective memory, the architecture of shared remembrance. Memory is not confined to the boundaries of the individual. While each person carries within them a private collection of recollections, personal, emotional, uniquely theirs, and civilizations, collective memory is the memory of a group, the shared past that binds people together across generations. It is inscribed in rituals, recorded in books, commemorated in monuments, and carried in the rhythms of speech, song, and tradition. This collective remembrance is not just a mirror of the past, but a force that shapes identity, morality, and destiny. To understand collective memory is to understand how societies remember, and in doing so, how they define who they are. From the moment human beings began to live in groups, memory became a communal affair. Early hunter-gatherers passed down knowledge, orally teaching one another which plants to eat, which predators to fear, where the water ran cleanest. This transmission of memory was essential for survival. It allowed people to benefit from the experiences of others, to learn without suffering all the same risks, to build upon past successes and avoid repeating past mistakes. Around fires and beneath the stars, stories were told not just for entertainment, but as vessels of memory, preserving the wisdom of elders and the values of the tribe. With the advent of writing, memory took on new dimensions. No longer dependent solely on oral transmission, societies began to externalize memory in permanent forms. Cuneiform tablets, hieroglyphic inscriptions, carved runestones, and illuminated manuscripts became repositories of the collective past. Writing allowed memory to extend across time and space, reaching beyond the lifespan of any individual. It created a durable record of laws, battles, births, beliefs, and legends. It transformed memory from something ephemeral into something archival. But collective memory is not simply what is written down, it is also what is performed and remembered together. Religious rituals, national holidays, funerals, and ceremonies are acts of memory. They create a shared space where people come together to remember events that define them as a group. A nation might commemorate its independence. A community might honor its martyrs. A family might gather to remember an ancestor. These moments are not passive recollections, but active reaffirmations of identity. They tell the participants, this is who we are, this is what matters, this is what we must never forget. However, collective memory is selective. Just as individual memory filters experience through emotion and significance, so too does society choose which events to emphasize and which to forget. This selection is influenced by power, politics, and culture. History is often written by the victors, and collective memory can become a tool of dominance or resistance. In some cases, traumatic events are buried or sanitized, their pain deemed too great or too threatening to confront. In others, memory is weaponized, used to inflame hatred, justify violence, or divide communities. One of the most studied examples of collective memory is the Holocaust. The memory of this atrocity is preserved through museums, memorials, education, and survivor testimony. It is a memory marked by mourning, warning, and the ethical demand of never again. The collective remembrance of the Holocaust serves not only as a tribute to the victims, but as a moral compass for the future. It shows how memory can function as a form of justice, a refusal to allow erasure, a stand against forgetting. Yet even this memory, so carefully guarded, is vulnerable to distortion, denial, and fading as time passes and eyewitnesses die. Collective memory also plays a critical role in national identity. Myths of origin, founding fathers, wars of independence, and heroic figures become part of a country's story about itself. These memories may be grounded in fact or colored by legend, but they serve a unifying function. They give citizens a sense of belonging, a place in a lineage, a reason to care about the fate of the nation. At the same time, contested memories can tear societies apart. Debates over monuments, textbooks, and historical interpretation often reflect deeper struggles over who gets to define the past and therefore the present. In post-conflict societies, the reconstruction of collective memory can be a matter of life and death. Truth commissions, public apologies, reparations, and memorials are all ways in which societies attempt to reckon with dark chapters in their history. These efforts are not merely about uncovering facts, they are about healing, reconciliation, and the possibility of a shared future. Without confronting painful memories, wounds fester, but with careful, compassionate remembrance, there is the potential for growth and transformation. Technology has radically expanded the scope of collective memory. The internet, social media, and digital archives have created new forms of remembrance and forgetting. Events can be recorded in real time, preserved indefinitely, and accessed by anyone with a connection. This democratization of memory has both empowered marginalized voices and flooded the cultural landscape with competing narratives. It has made memory more accessible but also more chaotic. The line between history and rumor, truth and myth, is increasingly blurred. In the digital age, memory is fast, global, and often ephemeral, trending one moment, gone the next. Yet even in this shifting landscape, the need for collective memory remains. In times of crisis, natural disasters, pandemics, acts of terror, societies turn to memory to make sense of suffering, to commemorate the lost. After September 11, 2001, for example, memorials rose across the world. Names were etched in stone, flags flown at half-mast, moments of silence observed. These acts were not just about grief, they were about unity, identity, and the reaffirmation of values under threat. Children grow up within the collective memory of their culture. They inherit its stories, symbols, and silences. Through education, holidays, media, and family traditions, they learn what their society considers important. This inheritance shapes their worldview, often unconsciously. It influences how they see themselves, others, and their place in the world. As they mature, they may question or reinterpret this inheritance, but they cannot escape it entirely. It is part of the air they breathe. At its best, collective memory connects people across time, anchoring the present in the wisdom and warnings of the past. It honors those who came before and guides those who come after. It creates bridges between generations, between strangers, between conflicting identities, but it must be tended with care. Memory can unify or divide, heal or wound, enlighten or mislead. It must be critically examined, thoughtfully curated, and shared with humility. In the end, Collective memory is a kind of living monument not built of stone or steel, but of stories, rituals, and shared understanding. It is a map drawn in the mind of a people, showing where they have been and hinting at where they might go. It is a responsibility as much as a resource, for what we choose to remember together becomes the foundation of what we choose to become together. In the next part, we will delve into the fascinating world of memory champions, individuals who have trained their minds to remember vast amounts of information with astonishing precision. We will explore the ancient techniques they use, the science behind their feats, and what their abilities reveal about the untapped potential of the human mind. 16. Memory champions. Unlocking the mind's hidden power. Across dimly lit stages and crowded halls, in silence broken only by the flipping of cards or the murmurs of awestruck spectators, a small group of individuals performs feats that seem to defy the limits of human memory. They recite hundreds of digits of pi, memorize entire shuffled decks of cards in under a minute, recall obscure historical facts, names, and faces after just a glance. These are the memory champions, mental athletes, who have transformed memory from a passive faculty into an art, a discipline, and for some, a way of life. Their abilities may seem superhuman, but they rest on techniques as ancient as they are effective, revealing the astonishing potential of the human mind when trained with purpose and creativity. The world of competitive memory is both niche and rigorous. Events like the World Memory Championships pit participants against one another in a series of challenges that test the speed, accuracy, and endurance of memory. Competitors must memorize random words, binary digits, abstract images, and entire poems under strict time constraints. To the uninitiated, these tasks seem impossible, yet they are performed regularly, often with near-perfect precision. What makes these feats even more remarkable is that the individuals performing them are, for the most part, not savants or genetically gifted prodigies. They are ordinary people who have trained their minds using methods that date back to the ancient world. At the heart of nearly every memory champion's success lies the method of loci, also known as the memory palace technique. This method, first recorded in the writings of the Roman orator Cicero and later refined by Greek philosophers and medieval scholars, relies on the brain's remarkable capacity for spatial memory. The idea is deceptively simple. To remember a list of items, one visualizes a familiar place, a house, a street, a building, and mentally places the items within it as vivid, sometimes absurd, images. When it's time to recall the information, the person mentally walks through this imagined space, retrieving each item in order. This technique works because the human brain is especially adept at remembering spatial environments and visual imagery. Long before written language, early humans relied on memory to navigate terrain, locate food sources, and recognize dangers. The neural circuits responsible for spatial memory are robust and well-developed, particularly in the hippocampus. By associating abstract information with physical space, the method of loci leverages these ancient strengths. Memory champions take this to extraordinary levels, building vast imaginary palaces, cities, or even entire worlds in their minds, each filled with coded symbols representing knowledge. Another commonly used technique is the major system, a phonetic mnemonic that converts numbers into consonant sounds, then into words and images. For instance, the number 32 might be turned into the sounds M and N, which could then become the word moon. By creating a vivid image of a moon and placing it in a specific location within a memory palace, a competitor can encode long sequences of digits into memorable scenes. These systems allow memory athletes to remember not just simple facts, but complex data structures, dense texts, and highly detailed information across domains. What sets memory champions apart is not the content they remember, but the way they think about memory itself. To them, memory is not passive. Recall it is active construction. It is not about brute force repetition, but about transformation. They do not attempt to remember information in the form it is given. They translate it into something visual, emotional, and spatially anchored. This approach mirrors what we know from neuroscience, that memory is stronger when it is meaningful, multisensory, and emotionally engaging. Training to become a memory athlete requires discipline, creativity, and relentless practice. It involves building and refining memory palaces, developing personal systems of association, and constantly pushing the limits of what can be held and retrieved. Many competitors describe it as a form of mental fitness, just as one trains muscles in the gym. So too can one train the mind. Over time, the brain becomes more agile, more responsive, more capable of storing and retrieving information on command. This kind of cognitive training has shown benefits beyond competition, improving focus, learning, and even emotional regulation. Some memory champions have taken their skills beyond the competitive arena, using them in professional and academic contexts. Medical students, lawyers, and linguists have adapted mnemonic systems to retain massive amounts of information. Actors use them to memorize scripts, musicians to learn compositions, and speakers to deliver hour-long presentations without notes. The principles that underlie memory championships are widely applicable and profoundly empowering. They suggest that memory is not fixed, but flexible, not a gift, but a skill. Despite their extraordinary abilities, memory champions remain grounded in the biology and psychology of memory. Their achievements do not contradict science. They illuminate it. By demonstrating what is possible, they challenge long-held assumptions about the limits of memory. They also open the door to a deeper understanding of how memory can be cultivated, protected, and enhanced. This has important implications not only for education but also for aging and cognitive health. Techniques used by memory athletes are now being studied as potential interventions for memory decline in older adults and in conditions such as Alzheimer's disease. Yet the world of memory championships is not without its philosophical dimensions. Many champions speak of the beauty of memory, the joy of discovery, the satisfaction of mastery. For them, memorizing is not merely utilitarian. It is an exploration of the mind's landscape, a journey through imagination, discipline, and insight. Some describe the meditative quality of training, the way it brings order to thought and focus to consciousness. In this sense, memory training becomes more than a means to an end. It becomes a form of mental art, a celebration of the mind's capacity to hold and shape the world. There is also a communal aspect to the memory sports world. Despite the intensity of competition, there is a shared reverence for the craft, a culture of mentorship, and a commitment to pushing boundaries. Competitors often exchange tips, refine techniques, and celebrate each other's breakthroughs. The spirit is one of exploration, not ego, a recognition that the true opponent is not one another, but the assumed limits of the human brain. As we marvel at the feats of memory champions, we are reminded that we all possess this capacity, latent, waiting to be awakened. The techniques they use are not hidden or mystical. They are teachable, testable, and adaptable. They remind us that memory is not a passive recording device, but an active, dynamic process. With attention, intention, and imagination, the mind can be trained to remember more, to remember better, and perhaps to remember beautifully. In the next part, we will turn our gaze toward memory and aging, how memory changes over the lifespan, what remains, what fades, and how individuals can maintain cognitive vitality through the years. The journey of memory does not end in youth. Rich with both challenge and potential, into the twilight of life. 17. Memory and aging. The shifting landscape of the mind. Memory changes over the course of a lifetime. It grows and deepens in youth, stabilizes in adulthood, and often becomes more fragile with age. This evolution is not a sign of decay, but a natural process. a shifting of the mind's architecture as it adapts to new stages of life. As the body ages, so too does the brain, reshaping the way we store, retrieve, and experience memory. But while age brings changes, it does not bring uniform decline. Some aspects of memory may weaken, but others endure and even flourish. The aging brain, far from being a dimming candle, remains a site of complexity, resilience, and profound meaning. One of the most common cognitive concerns associated with aging is forgetfulness. Names may escape us, appointments slip the mind, keys disappear into the background of everyday life. These are experiences familiar to many older adults, and they often spark anxiety about the possibility of cognitive decline. Yet not all memory lapses are signs of serious problems. In fact, certain kinds of memory are more vulnerable to aging than others. Understanding the nuances can help distinguish normal aging from pathological decline. Episodic memory, the ability to recall specific events situated in time and place, is often the first to show signs of age-related change. As people grow older, it may become harder to remember recent conversations, where one put an object, or what one did yesterday afternoon. This form of memory relies heavily on the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, areas that are particularly sensitive to the effects of aging. Changes in blood flow, synaptic density, and neuroplasticity can contribute to decreased efficiency in encoding and retrieving episodic information. However, the decline is typically gradual and varies widely among individuals. In contrast, semantic memory, our storehouse of general knowledge, vocabulary, and facts, tends to remain stable or even improve with age. Older adults often have richer vocabularies, deeper wells of historical and cultural knowledge, and a refined sense of meaning derived from decades of life experience. This reflects the distributed nature of semantic memory in the brain and its reinforcement through repeated use. Similarly, procedural memory, the memory of skills and habits, like riding a bike or playing an instrument, often remains intact well into old age. These types of memory are supported by brain regions such as the basal ganglia and cerebellum, which are less affected by aging. Working memory, the ability to hold and manipulate information over short periods, is another area that can decline with age. Tasks that require multitasking, rapid problem solving, or mental juggling become more challenging. This decline is associated with changes in the prefrontal cortex, a region responsible for executive functions like attention, inhibition, and mental flexibility. Slower processing speed is also common, making it more difficult for older adults to encode new information quickly or to retrieve it efficiently under pressure. Yet it is important to recognize that age-related memory change is not inevitable, nor is it purely biological. Lifestyle, education, mental stimulation, and social engagement all play critical roles in shaping cognitive aging. The concept of cognitive reserve, the brain's resilience to damage, suggests that individuals who engage in lifelong learning, rich social interactions, and mentally challenging activities are better equipped to maintain memory function into old age. This reserve is built through neural pathways that compensate for age-related changes, allowing the brain to adapt and rewire itself in response to challenges. Sleep, exercise, and nutrition are also fundamental to preserving memory with age. Sleep supports memory consolidation and disruptions in sleep patterns, which become more common in older adults, can impair cognitive function. Physical activity increases blood flow to the brain and promotes neurogenesis, particularly in the hippocampus. Diets rich in antioxidants, omega-3 fatty acids, and anti-inflammatory foods support brain health, while conditions like diabetes, hypertension, and obesity are known to increase the risk of cognitive decline. The mind and body, inseparable throughout life, remain deeply intertwined in the aging process. Emotional health plays a profound role as well. Depression, anxiety, and loneliness are associated with poorer memory performance and greater risk of dementia. Older adults who experience meaning, purpose, and joy tend to have better cognitive outcomes. This is not just psychological, it is physiological. Positive emotions enhance the production of neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, which are vital for memory formation and mood regulation. Social connection, in particular, has been shown to protect against cognitive decline, offering not just companionship but stimulation, novelty, and shared remembrance. One of the paradoxes of aging is that while some types of memory decline, others become more vivid. Many older adults report a phenomenon known as the reminiscence bump, a tendency to recall events from adolescence and early adulthood with unusual clarity and emotion. These formative years, filled with change, identity formation, and first experiences, become a kind of anchor for the self in later life. They provide a narrative coherence, a sense of continuity, and a reservoir of meaning. In this way, memory in aging is not just about recall, it is about reflection, storytelling, and the integration of life's chapters into a coherent whole. For some, however, memory loss becomes more than an annoyance. It becomes a symptom of neurodegenerative disease. Conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other forms of dementia involve progressive deterioration of brain tissue and function. In Alzheimer's, the hippocampus and surrounding medial temporal lobe structures are among the first to be affected, leading to profound episodic memory loss. As the disease progresses, it invades other regions, eroding language, reasoning, and personality. These diseases are devastating, not just because they rob individuals of memories, but because they unravel the very fabric of identity. Yet, even in the face of these diseases, there are moments of grace. Music, for instance, often remains accessible even to those with advanced dementia. A familiar song can awaken memories buried beneath the surface, bringing joy, tears, and recognition. This suggests that some forms of memory are deeply rooted, bypassing damaged neural circuits and tapping into emotional and sensory pathways that remain intact. It is a reminder that memory is not just cognitive, it is embodied, emotional, and relational. Advances in neuroscience and medicine are offering new hope for aging memory. Brain stimulation techniques, pharmacological interventions, and digital cognitive training programs are being developed and tested. Researchers are exploring biomarkers for early detection, genetic risk factors, and lifestyle interventions to slow or prevent decline. While no cure exists yet for Alzheimer's, progress is being made in understanding its mechanisms and in supporting those who live with it. But perhaps the most profound insight from studying memory and aging is the realization that memory is not just about accuracy or detail, it is about meaning. Older adults often become the storytellers of their families and communities, passing down wisdom, humor, and heritage. They curate the past, interpret its lessons, and offer perspective to younger generations. In this role, they demonstrate that even as certain memories fade, others deepen. Even as speed diminishes, richness can grow. To age is not to be forgotten. It is to enter a different rhythm of memory, a slower, deeper, more reflective mode. It is to let go of what is no longer needed and to hold close what truly matters. It is to weave the fragments of a life into a tapestry of memory, and in doing so, to shape the legacy one leaves behind. In the next part, we will examine the phenomenon of forgetting not as failure, but as a necessary and often beneficial aspect of memory itself. We will explore why we forget, how forgetting helps us prioritize, and what happens when forgetting goes awry. For to remember well, we must also understand how and why we forget. 18. The purpose of forgetting. when memory lets go. To forget is often seen as a flaw, a failure of attention, a sign of weakness, or worse, the creeping shadow of disease. In a culture that values retention and information, forgetting can feel like betrayal. Yet forgetting is not merely the opposite of remembering. It is its companion. It is an essential part of the memory system, just as silence is to music, or rest is to motion. Without forgetting, the mind would drown in detail, overwhelmed by irrelevance and unable to distinguish the vital from the trivial. Forgetting is not an error, it is a function. It is the brain's way of pruning, shaping, and adapting. To understand memory, we must understand why and how we forget. From the first moments of life, the brain is flooded with stimuli, sounds, sights, touches, smells, and emotions. Every second brings new input, most of it fleeting and unremarkable. If every sensation were remembered equally, the mind would become cluttered and dysfunctional. The ability to forget, then, is a filter, a mechanism that allows us to prioritize. It ensures that only the most salient, emotionally significant, or repeatedly accessed information is retained. In this sense, forgetting is not a failure of memory, but a form of memory optimization. Neuroscientists have identified several processes by which forgetting occurs. One of the most well-known is decay, the gradual weakening of memory traces over time. If a memory is not revisited or reinforced, the neural connections that support it begin to fade. This is a natural result of synaptic efficiency. The brain reallocates resources to connections that are active and meaningful. Decay explains why we forget phone numbers we haven't dialed in years, names of acquaintances we met only once, or the precise details of yesterday's lunch. These memories were simply not important enough to maintain. Another major mechanism of forgetting is interference. This occurs when new information competes with or overwrites older memories. There are two types: proactive interference, where old memories interfere with new ones, and retroactive interference, where new memories disrupt older ones. For example, learning a new password might make it harder to recall an old one, or remembering a recent conversation may blur the details of a similar conversation from the past. Interference shows that memory is not stored in isolated compartments. It is a dynamic network where connections can overlap and collide. Repression, a more controversial form of forgetting, involves the unconscious blocking of memories that are emotionally distressing. Sigmund Freud proposed that the mind defends itself against trauma by burying painful experiences out of conscious awareness. While the mechanisms of repression remain debated, there is evidence that strong emotional stress can impair the encoding or retrieval of memory. Some individuals genuinely forget traumatic events, only to recall them later under certain conditions. However, memory is malleable, and not all recovered memories are accurate. This blurs the line between forgetting and distortion, a topic that continues to provoke scientific and ethical debates. More recently, researchers have identified active mechanisms of forgetting involving specific brain structures and chemicals. In particular, the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex play key roles in memory suppression. Studies using functional MRI have shown that individuals can consciously inhibit the retrieval of unwanted memories, a process that engages neural circuits distinct from those involved in recall. This suggests that forgetting can be intentional. It can be trained. Just as we focus to remember, we can focus to forget. In some cases, this may be protective, helping individuals move past painful experiences or emotional burdens. Sleep also contributes to forgetting. While sleep is crucial for memory consolidation, it is also a time when the brain clears out unnecessary information. During slow-wave sleep, the brain undergoes synaptic downscaling, a process in which weak or redundant synaptic connections are pruned. This makes room for new learning and reduces noise in the memory system. It is as if the mind, during rest, reviews the day's experiences and decides which ones are worth keeping. The rest are gently let go. But forgetting is not always beneficial. In certain conditions, it becomes pathological. Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia involve widespread forgetting that disrupts daily life and erodes identity. Unlike normal aging, which selectively affects certain types of memory, these conditions involve the loss of core autobiographical knowledge, recognition of loved ones, and the ability to form new memories. This kind of forgetting is not a function, it is a breakdown. It reflects the collapse of the biological structures that support memory. Yet even here, moments of clarity, emotional resonance, and deep-seated memories can remain, reminding us that memory is layered and complex. At the other extreme, there are individuals who appear unable to forget. People with highly superior autobiographical memory, HSAM, can recall nearly every day of their lives in vivid detail. While this may seem like a gift, it can be a burden. Some individuals with HSAM report being trapped by their memories, unable to move on from past pains or regrets. Their minds replay experiences involuntarily, with a clarity that can be overwhelming. This suggests that forgetting, in its natural form, is not only adaptive, but necessary for emotional regulation and well-being. Forgetting also serves a social function. It allows us to forgive, to grow, and to change. If every insult, mistake, or moment of embarrassment were permanently etched into memory, relationships would be harder to sustain. The softening of memory over time enables reconciliation, maturity, and the creation of new narratives. We forget not only what others have done to us, but also the versions of ourselves we no longer wish to be. In this way, forgetting makes possible the reinvention of identity. Culturally, forgetting can be both a curse and a strategy. Societies sometimes engage in collective forgetting, suppressing memories of violence, injustice, or failure in order to preserve cohesion or avoid conflict. This can lead to historical amnesia, where the lessons of the past are lost. But forgetting can also be a form of survival. Post-war societies, oppressed peoples, and displaced communities may choose to forget certain chapters in order to focus on rebuilding, healing, or maintaining hope. This kind of forgetting is not passive, it is deliberate, strategic, and often painful. Technological memory complicates this picture further. In an age where digital storage is cheap and ubiquitous, we are increasingly outsourcing memory to devices. Photos, messages, search histories, and location data are preserved indefinitely, often beyond our control. This challenges our natural rhythm of forgetting, raising questions about privacy, identity, and the right to be forgotten. When everything is remembered, nothing is allowed to fade. The digital mirror becomes unflinching and perhaps unforgiving. Ultimately, forgetting is not a flaw to be fixed, but a feature to be understood. It is the brain's way of making sense of time, of letting go so that something new can take its place. It allows us to focus, adapt, forgive, and heal. It reminds us that memory is not about perfect recall, but about meaningful retention. What we forget shapes us as much as what we remember. In the next part, we will explore the phenomenon of false memories, how the brain can create vivid, believable memories of events that never happened. We will examine the science, the stories, and the implications of this strange and powerful aspect of human cognition, where the line between reality and imagination becomes blurred. 19. False memories. When the mind remembers what never was. Memory is often imagined as a faithful recording device, capturing the sights, sounds, and sensations of our experiences with fidelity and precision. Yet in truth, memory is a construction, a dynamic and interpretive process shaped by perception, emotion, context, and time. We do not replay memories like videos. We rebuild them from fragments. And in that rebuilding lies vulnerability. Sometimes the mind remembers things that never happened. These are false memories, mental fabrications that feel as real, vivid, and emotionally charged as true recollections. They are not lies or delusions. They are sincere beliefs, rooted in the same neural processes that produce accurate memories. Their existence challenges the very idea of truth in memory and raises profound questions about identity, trust, and the reliability of human cognition. The phenomenon of false memory has been documented for centuries, though it has gained new attention in recent decades through psychological research, legal controversies, and neuroscientific discovery. One of the most famous experiments in the study of false memories was conducted by cognitive psychologist Elizabeth Loftus. Her work demonstrated that human memory is highly suggestible and malleable. In a series of studies, participants were shown footage of a car accident and then asked leading questions, such as, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? The wording affected the participants' recollections. Those who heard smashed estimated higher speeds and were more likely to report seeing broken glass, even though none was present. This simple manipulation revealed a startling truth. Memory could be altered by a single word. In another groundbreaking study, Loftus and her colleagues implanted entirely false memories into the minds of participants. They asked individuals to recall a childhood event being lost in a shopping mall that had never actually occurred. By providing plausible details and suggesting the event had been confirmed by family members, researchers found that a significant portion of participants came to believe the false event was real. They described emotions, visuals, and even sensory experiences. These were not just errors, they were full-fledged memories, constructed from suggestion and imagination. False memories can form through a variety of mechanisms. Suggestion, as seen in Loftus's studies, is a powerful tool, particularly when it comes from an authority figure or trusted source. Repetition also plays a role. The more often an idea is repeated, the more familiar it becomes, and familiarity breeds credibility. Over time, imagined events can be mistaken for real ones, especially if the imagination is rich in sensory detail. This is known as imagination inflation. When we mentally simulate an event, picture it, feel it, narrate it, it can become woven into the tapestry of real memories. Emotions amplify this process. A memory that evokes strong feelings, fear, shame, joy, tends to feel more vivid and true, even if it's false. The brain does not distinguish well between the emotional charge of a real event and that of a vividly imagined one. Neuroimaging studies show that true and false memories activate many of the same brain regions, including the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. The difference is subtle, often imperceptible to conscious awareness. This overlap makes it difficult to distinguish fact from fiction based on mental experience alone. False memories are not rare. They occur in everyday life, often harmlessly. A person might misremember where they parked the car, or be certain they sent an email they only drafted in their head. Couples argue over who said what and when, each confident in their recollection. Friends remember shared experiences differently, filling in gaps with assumptions or blending memories together. These small discrepancies are a normal part of cognitive life. But when false memories involve significant events, criminal acts, traumatic experiences, or life-changing decisions, the consequences can be profound. One of the most controversial applications of false memory research has been in the legal realm. Eyewitness testimony, long considered a cornerstone of justice, is now known to be highly unreliable. Witnesses may sincerely believe they saw something that did not occur, or misidentify someone based on flawed recall. Cases have emerged in which individuals were wrongfully convicted based on confident but false testimony. The Innocence Project, which uses DNA evidence to exonerate the wrongly convicted, has found that faulty memory plays a role in a majority of these cases. The implications are stark. Lives can be shattered by memory's imperfections. Even more troubling are cases involving recovered memories of childhood abuse. In the 1980s and 1990s, a wave of therapy practices aimed to uncover repressed memories of trauma. Some individuals came to believe they had been abused based on suggestive techniques, guided imagery, or hypnotic regression. In some instances, these recovered memories led to criminal accusations and family estrangement. Later investigations revealed that many of these memories were likely false products of therapeutic influence rather than recovered truth. These events sparked a cultural and scientific reckoning about the boundaries between memory and suggestion, the ethics of therapy, and the fragility of personal history. Yet not all false memories are induced externally. The mind itself can fabricate. Dreams, fantasies, and daydreams can merge with reality, especially in states of stress, fatigue, or emotional turmoil. People may misremember the source of a memory, a phenomenon called source monitoring error. For example, they may recall reading something in a news article that they actually heard in a conversation, or they may attribute an idea to themselves that they borrowed from someone else. These errors are not signs of deceit or delusion. They reflect the brain's reliance on inference, reconstruction, and coherence over precise recording. False memories also have cultural dimensions. Collective false memories, where large groups of people remember something that never happened, have become the subject of fascination and humor. The Mandela effect, named after the false belief that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s, is one such phenomenon. Other examples include misremembered logos, movie quotes, and historical details. While some interpret these as evidence of alternate realities or collective hallucination, they more likely reflect the quirks of shared memory, media influence, and the human tendency to seek patterns. Despite their flaws, false memories serve a function. They fill in gaps, maintain narrative continuity, and support identity. The mind favors coherence over accuracy. It seeks to make sense of experience, even if it must invent or reshape the past to do so. In this light, false memories are not just cognitive errors, they are expressions of the mind's need for meaning. They reveal how memory is not a static archive, but a living story, revised with each retelling. Modern neuroscience continues to probe the boundaries between true and false memory. Brain imaging can reveal subtle differences in activation patterns. The challenge is not only scientific but philosophical. If we experience a memory as true, does it matter that it is false? What does it mean for identity if parts of our past are fabrications? Can we trust our minds at all? In the next and final part, we will return to the human heart of memory, to the stories we tell ourselves and others, to the role of memory in identity, and to the enduring mystery of how our past shapes our present. Memory is not just a function, it is the foundation of self. And in the dance of remembering and forgetting, truth and illusion, we find the essence of what it means to be human. 20. Memory and the self, the story that makes us whole. Memory is not merely the storage of facts, names, or experiences. It is the soul of identity, the hidden author of our life story. We remember to know who we are. Memory is the thread that stitches together the patchwork of our lives: childhood laughter, teenage turmoil, adult struggles, and moments of quiet triumph. Without memory, the self unravels. With it, we carry our past into every decision, relationship, and hope. Memory is the lens through which we interpret the world and our place within it. It is the foundation of continuity, personality, and moral compass. The story it tells is not just a record of what happened, but a reflection of how we see ourselves and wish to be seen. Every person, consciously or not, constructs a narrative of their life. This narrative draws on memory, shaped by culture, emotion, values, and personal meaning. It is not a perfect history. It is a curated collection of moments, infused with interpretation. The same event might be remembered as formative or traumatic depending on how it is integrated into the broader story. A failure may become the seed of resilience. A loss might illuminate what truly matters. These narratives are dynamic. They evolve with new experiences, reinterpretation, and reflection. The self is not fixed, but forged again and again through memory. Autobiographical memory is the psychological mechanism by which we form this narrative. It encompasses specific episodes, like a graduation or a breakup, as well as general themes, such as I am someone who overcomes obstacles, or I am someone who is often let down. These memories are not merely records of the past. They are templates for future behavior. They guide how we respond to new situations, how we relate to others, and how we make sense of setbacks and successes. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are have profound consequences. They shape our self-esteem and even our physical well-being. But identity is not constructed in isolation. Memory is profoundly social. From childhood, our earliest memories are often shaped by conversations with parents, caregivers, and peers. We learn what is worth remembering through social cues, what stories are repeated, which emotions are affirmed, and which experiences are given meaning. Over time, our personal narrative becomes intertwined with collective narratives, family history, cultural myths, national identity. We do not remember alone. We remember through dialogue, through ritual, and through shared symbols. The stories of us shape the story of me. Yet memory is also selective. Not everything that happens becomes part of the narrative. The mind filters experience, emphasizing some moments while discarding others. This selection is not random, it serves a psychological function. People tend to remember events that confirm their sense of self. This is called the self-memory system. A person who sees themselves as brave may remember the time they spoke out in a meeting, but forget the time they remained silent. A person who feels unlovable may focus on rejections and overlook moments of affection. This selective recall reinforces the current self-concept, for better or worse. It provides consistency, but also carries the risk of rigidity and distortion. Therapy often involves revisiting these personal narratives. By examining the stories we tell about our past, we can uncover limiting beliefs, challenge false assumptions, and reframe experiences in a more compassionate light. A client might come to realize that what they saw as weakness was actually survival, or that an event they viewed as a failure was a moment of courage. Through memory, they reconstruct the self, not by changing what happened, but by changing what it means. This process reflects a deep truth. Our memories shape our identity, but our identity also shapes our memories. Memory also connects us to morality. Many of our ethical decisions are guided by remembered experiences. Times we hurt someone, felt shame, or witnessed injustice. Memory allows us to learn from the past, to develop empathy, and to uphold values. It also holds us accountable. The inability to remember wrongdoing, whether due to cognitive impairment or repression, can erode the sense of responsibility. On a societal level, memory of collective suffering such as genocide, slavery, or oppression can become the moral backbone of social movements and national reckoning. These memories are not abstract, they are the ground on which justice stands. As life progresses, memory becomes a source of comfort and legacy. Older adults often turn to reminiscence, not out of nostalgia alone, but as a way of affirming identity, transmitting wisdom, and making peace with the past. Life review is a psychological process in which people reflect on their experiences, integrating joys and regrets into a coherent story. This process can be healing. It can provide meaning in the face of loss, continuity in the face of change, and dignity in the face of mortality. Even as memory fades, the need for narrative endures. In the final chapters of life, memory takes on a sacred role. Families gather to share stories, to remember the departed, to hold on to the essence of a person beyond their physical presence. Photos, letters, objects, and rituals become vessels of memory. They carry forward the self, even after death, echoing in the minds and hearts of those left behind. In this way, memory becomes a bridge between generations. It is how we are remembered that often defines the final measure of a life. But memory's relationship with identity is not without its fragilities. In conditions like Alzheimer's disease, the erosion of memory can feel like the erosion of self. When a person no longer remembers their spouse, their children, or their own name, we ask painful questions. Who are they now? Are they still the same person? These are not merely medical questions, they are philosophical and existential. They reveal the centrality of memory to the human condition. Without memory, can the self survive? And yet, even in these conditions, moments of identity can break through. A song can evoke a smile. A familiar face can spark recognition. A childhood prayer, spoken softly, can bring comfort. These glimpses remind us that the self is not a single fixed entity. It is layered, distributed, and resilient. It lives not only in the brain, but in relationships, in culture, in the impressions we leave on others. Identity, like memory, is both internal and external, fragile and enduring. As we close this journey through the mind's landscape, from neurons and synapses to ancient techniques, from forgetting to fabrication, from the biology of memory to the architecture of the self, we return to a fundamental truth. Memory is what makes us human. It is not perfect, it is not immutable, but it is powerful beyond measure. It shapes how we see the world, how we love, how we suffer, and how we grow. To remember is to carry the past into the present, to shape the future with wisdom born of experience. To forget is to release, to heal, to make space for what comes next. Between remembering and forgetting lies the story of every life, a story of loss and learning, sorrow and celebration, identity and imagination. In the end, we are not just flesh and bone, nor merely minds and matter. We are stories, told in the language of memory, and it is through these stories that we endure.